Syllabus journal entry. We're going to go through the current events, the headlines, the controversial news, the information that's being suppressed, all the disinformation. We're going to weed it out. And we're here to stand up against this racial demagoguery coming out of Washington, D.C. These new psychological operations, this new intelligence community that's there to bring down the American people. We're going to resist. We remember our Bill of Rights, our Declaration of Independence, our Constitution, the battle for which our forefathers and our ancestors fought to give us this freedom. We're not going to let it go. We have Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden and all these tyrannists bringing tyranny down. They're here to worship at the altar of the Party of Davos, the City of London, and the absolute authoritarian state, biosecurity state of the globalists. We're here to remember and stand up for American freedom and liberty.
And our conversation continues to be a challenging one, and this is the necessity of free speech in order to be able to criticize and openly call into question the nature of the authority, of authority, of all authorities. Authority is such that it wants to rule and regulate without any kind of oversight, without any limitations, and the necessity of the rights of the people to be established under law and protected by law is so that the authorities won't overrun and crush and destroy the people, which what we used to call a good old-fashioned democidal behavior of the government. And that's why I feel so bad about what's going on with Washington, D.C. We have to be able to criticize the Capitol. I mean, poor old George Washington himself just turning over in his grave because the city after his name has become and the apotheosis of Washington. I mean, really, it's gagging. It's repulsive that they put such a horrifying, idolatrous kind of sense of absolute statism, absolute totalitarianism in the name of this kind of timid and yet courageous and maybe awkward and shy even George Washington, the man that ultimately God really used. I mean, you have to just face that. Just the way that it looks like Satan used Mao Zedong to create so much evil in the world. In this case, we can see that the religious liberties of the colonists was what was so precious. What they had so little oversight, so much independence here in the colonies, away from the strictures of society, the social mores, and the constant work of the Romanist Church out of the Vatican, the papal states, if you will, there, the absolute authoritarian religious dictatorship of the Pope over all the different kingdoms and principalities and the different powers of Europe. And ultimately the Puritans and those who had to go for that god-awful trip and did forsake everything to come to the New World would experience such an incredible volume of independence and liberty that they realized that they would die for it. So that's what we see being squelched today in America. And we have to ultimately look over there at the FBI, as they're supposed to be tapping all of us, monitoring all of us and looking for any behaviors that they might be able to bring back some scalps back to their masters in Washington, D.C., which is Obama, the secret committee, right? The secret council. They're like, we don't know it's Obama and the Antifa, psychopaths, as they built themselves up into this neo-fascism, this neo-streak Bolsheviks. And so, we can see that as we use the freedom of our speech here, and we're like criticizing and having an open mind towards what our ultimately our enemies are doing. And you have to recognize that, I don't know if Trump is scripted or what, but ultimately he was right, because the media and the press is the enemy of the people. and it's there just to spin some kind of corporate prerogative, some kind of like media marketing brainwash comes through The View every day. And so I think that out of New York City, and so you can see that our problems are with the entire city of Washington, D.C., who've ultimately propped up this paramilitary CDC operation. And you can see that when we're listening to Kennedy, the intellectual and the statesman, that they're talking to Tucker Carlson, and we'll have to actually put some of that on here. It's so crucial. I mean, and it's obvious that the man is putting it on the record, just like his famous presidential brother did, just putting it out there that about the conspiracy, the secret program to ultimately bring down America and to enslave the people of America. And you can see it in different ways. And we have to be able to express it freely. We have to recognize that the neo-leftists, radicals, the Jen Psaki's of the world out there who are having their orgy of political delight in this new authoritarian sweeping dictatorship with this Biden puppet, who ultimately you can see that he just is mouthing the words of his masters as he comes out, and he won't answer any questions. And you can see that the entire American federal state is being run by fiat through a pull-up bureau. And the secret committee, the invisible committee that's running this country from behind anonymity, behind the shadows, as they conspire. We're not allowed to say conspiracy theory, right? So we're boxed in our minds. We can't think asymmetrically. We have to recognize this is an information war, and we're entering into a point where the information war, the ability for you to get accurate information so that you can adjust your life, make the right decisions, and know which way. And ultimately, maybe you feel like that your course is already set, and you won't change direction. If you get the right information, you will recognize that if you're living in cities, if you're living in certain areas in the world, that your possibility for success when the lights go out, it becomes more and more remote. And you need to think more broadly. You need to think. We always listen to Geopolitics and Empire, the podcast, and you don't have to listen for very many episodes before you hear the different intellectuals and engineers and statesmen and different individuals and diplomats that the podcast hosts and talks to find out that people are preparing for the backlash and for the downtime. As you know, you can read the signs. You can see by looking which way the wind is blowing. You can see what time it is. Okay, you can see what's happening in the ANC in South Africa. You can see what kind of political divisiveness and the warfare that's being the paramilitary, neo-racists, the black supremacists that are coming out, who are just looking to create a fight. Before ostensibly the BLM movement was there to look to create equity and create, a discussion around the issues of blah, blah, blah around politics. But now the move is really an advance and an offensive in the culture. And it's a counterinsurgency ultimately, because now you can see individuals. You have the BLM guy, who maybe they just do the wrong drugs. That's we call them the crackheads. I mean, ultimately, this guy gets out of jail. He can't handle how high he gets. He rides around. He's pissed off, and he rams over the people. I mean, you can see that the negative energy and the psychosis is really building in the culture. So the people are being put under a tremendous amount of pressure with the campaigns towards putting intense negative thoughts, if you will, into the culture, negative pressure onto the mentality and the psychological state of people. And you can see that that's happening as there's kind of like a rift between what you know is really going on or what you suspect, because you can see, you can see the suspicious behavior, you can see the things being covered up, you can see the things being censored, you can see what you're not allowed to see. And then you can see that everyone else goes on to, the different, Whoopi Goldberg just goes on, they just shine on with the bullshit. And it's really kind of mind-numbing, and it gives you a sense of dislocation. So you have to understand that this is an information war. And in 1,000 different ways, people are going to be misinformed. and we just make an example out of the people with the flat earth thing. And it's difficult for people to get powerful propaganda out of their minds once it's kind of penetrated and they've kind of been shown the right graphs and had the right kind of influential personalities, steer their lack of judgment and ability to analyze circumstances, and it's ultimately used against them. I mean, so in order to stay informed, we have to ask challenging questions and tough questions. We have to find ourselves in a place of discomfort with the reality of the news that you're getting, because if your news is being curated and pampered and cushioned for you, and you're never getting any information that's like really disturbing, just like how they take the footage down so you can't see the images, when they do that, ultimately they're controlling what you're allowed to know, and they're making decisions about how much information you get, and you need to recognize that happens more than you realize. So all around the world, I have a guy I work with who's from Peru. The kind of information that people get in other places and other parts of the world is staggering, of really what's filtered out and the things we just never really come into our minds. Just like in many ways, the Wisconsin Christmas parade massacre, I mean, in a large way, I trust me, huge segments of our society here just crickets, because they didn't hear anything about it. It went by, it was a blip, and no one called attention to the ramifications of it. Not like if it was the other way around, if it was something that could carry on the political narrative that the elitist Hollywood technocrats and globalists ultimately are trying to shape our minds with. So they're always trying to craft a narrative to incite Black Lives Matter over any other lives, and obviously white lives are just oppressors. So that's the narrative, and that's what kids are ultimately going to be. And so they're stirring the pot and raising the temperature by degrees, so that by the time you decide that you need to like address it, man, you're a racist. And now the FBI is going to follow you around, because over there they're being trained up there in Georgetown, the Georgetown set. Right? They're just being trained. They've been being trained since they had the FBI manuals put in place, the training manuals to discuss white domestic terrorism and so on and so forth. So this whole idea, and I guess they've been put through their struggle sessions over critical race theory, and they've already admitted how racist they are. Now they're here to find all the other racists in the culture and punish all the white people. And how you could get such an incredibly insane and horrifying debacle out of Washington, D.C. in American politics. I mean, we're talking about the weaponization of intelligence agencies against the American people for one reason or another, because they're too whatever. And so you can see that Washington, D.C. no longer represents the will of the people, but it represents the will of the globalists and the elite. And in many ways, Xi Jinping and the European Union and the Vatican and global power structures, the World Health Organization, CDC, Anthony Fauci, so on and so forth. So that's the nature of this criticism. And I'm not going to change my views. I'm not going to stop expressing my opinion openly. I'm not going to be able to try to effectively silence myself because it would be safer, because people will pay attention and look in and try to ultimately destroy me with their politics and their bullshit, right? And it's dangerous. It's dangerous because the FBI is politicized, and it's like a neo-Stasi weapon being aimed directly at the heart of the American people and individuals like me. So as you're working with me, you out there, you should support me. You should look in and you should challenge my ideas when you see I'm missing it. And you should be concerned about my ability and right not being infringed by these neo-fascist power structures that are being empowered. Can you imagine snickering to yourself when you got your Glock and you're going to run up on some patriots because Biden's in power? I mean, these are some really sick individuals, and they're creating a gulag. They want to put away the red hat Trump people. And you might not. I never bought a red hat Trump. You know what I'm saying? I never really went in. I mean, I sent $10 to Trump because I was just so scared that what would happen would happen, and it did happen. So it's like one of those deals where you just can do what you can do, right? You can just do what you can do. But ultimately, in the end, these people are so they're so hard up And you can see that the genius idea of Hunter Biden, the crackhead son, with his disgusting porno issues. Hey man, you know what? Let me just step back. I won't criticize because I've been there. I totally get that guy. You know, and I guess we were all luckier people because we never had a dad like Joe Biden, and we never had anyone come and give us like $500 billion to just, you know, stash away. You know, every day you can't sleep because you're a crackhead and because you might go to prison. But hey, listen, they wagged the dog. They really did. The genius idea was to be friends with the intelligence agency and the CCP, and the intelligence agency and the CCP, and a death by 1,000 other ballot frauds. So ultimately, there was many ways that to skin a cat and to ultimately destroy Trump out of office, and just in the whole movement that was behind him, and democracy itself. And really, you can see was already being rigged, because I think when Hillary didn't get in there, I don't know. I mean, did not cheat hard enough? I mean, I guess they learned their lesson the second time around. But she must have been absolutely ready to overdose on adrenochrome after she could not become the president of the United States. And you can imagine that all this other shit would have hit when she was a president, you know, with BLM riots across the country and Antifa like beating the hell out of business owners and, you know, killing people and then just walking out of town, and then when Kyle Rittenhouse individuals try to like stand up for their lives, they're called white supremacists, and the media spins a false universe and a false narrative to the point where it's sickening and obvious, but they're there just to create the psychological wake. They're there just to put the mental and emotional pressure on the American people and just set things for overload. You know, they just set things to explode in the culture. That's what they really want. They want people who, you know what's really the racist? The racism is coming from the fact that people haven't really spent very much time around each other. You know, they're more familiar with their community, and their community are people that look like them. And so without that experience, things that are different, people are uncomfortable with. It's a matter of just being a local people. You can imagine you and me, whoever you can kind of figure me out and just say you randomly. We just drop ourselves into a village in the Philippines, and we're going to stand out. We're going to look different, and people there are going to realize we can't communicate, and we're not from there, and they're going to regard us differently because we're so strange. You know, so it's just the condition of human behavior to be uncomfortable with things that we're not familiar with, and it's just part of life. And even broaching the subject of race, it just makes you automatically a racist. Everything is racist now, so just be a racist. Just accept everything is racist. Nothing, you know, it doesn't have any meaning. You know, so that's how I see it in my culture, in my world. And when I go to different construction jobs, and people are just openly joking racially about racism, that it's racist because you're a fucking racist, he's a racist, shut up. And it just goes into calling each other racial slurs, and it's just back to where we started because it's all just a joke. We're watching my different friends, you know, at work who are white and black, or just making different jokes to make a racial reference and just laugh at each other and just pick on each other and just kind of like screw around, because it doesn't matter, because people are not being on the ground level, are not being drawn into the cultural psychosis and the debasing dehumanization of the relationships within the culture between Americans. It's not happening. Creating a racial disturbance within the culture is not effective. It's not effectively working. You can see that you have these people on there just going on and on and on, trying to amp up, just basically race baiting some kind of like issue with Al Sharptonism, just on there, just making there's an issue and there was a black person and now people should be angry, and just trying to lather up people, and people are not going for it. So I think that ultimately you can see that people are not feeding into the negativity. Americans are just happy to just dial it out and go on just listening to podcasts, finding other things on YouTube to watch, and just basically not listen to the mind-numbing, brainwash, propaganda bullshit that is just spewing in support of the narrative that's basically controlled by Nancy Pelosi, and in the background, obviously, Obama looms like a puppet master. And so you can see that America is just going to have to outlive these crooks and these fools and these demagogues, And they really are. Their demagoguery is to an extent now that it's really just shameful and repulsive, and they've just become these hideous swamp monsters and these hideous creatures, and they're over indulging themselves and engorging themselves on huge pallets of cash and just squirreling away money in different ways. You can see that the big sucking sound of their corruption and their criminal behavior that the FBI can't seem to investigate, but they're just out there looking for people with their hunting rifle out there in the rural area that might be a Trump supporter, and the FBI is all like foaming at the mouth at teachers' meetings. I mean, it's disgusting. The FBI has become a shameful, reprobate organization. And I'm not sure what they enforce now. Like they just enforced Steve Bannon to get arrested because of depositions, because of the power of the Congress. And so you can see that this is like going around and around the bowl. It's going around the toilet bowl. The whole situation, the power of Congress. Hey, it's our Congress. It's our country. These are the people there in this despicable capital who are borrowing trillions and trillions of dollars of bank credit on the international market. There's an international banking market, right? Like think like the Iron Bank in Game of Thrones. Like these people, we have borrowed their shit and we've printed out the receipts of the credit that we owe them and debt notes, and we're passing it around to each other as it devalues into sand. It's just becoming more and more confetti paper. As now you try to go in and buy a can of soda, just try to go buy a can of soda in the store, and it's going to be $2.25, or it's just ridiculous. It's to a level of insanity that it's a joke. People are looking around with a horrifying, down, shameful look on their face, a dour look, because people are just heartbroken and dispelled by what's happening. So we're all in the control of the Federal Reserve System and the Federal Reserve note. It controls our destiny. It controls how much you packed all this money away, and now the Federal Reserve will determine how much value it actually has. And in the end, you could come out with pallet loads of money stacked up to the moon. It's really just worth like leaves. It's just worth like grass clippings. It's just worth nothing. And of course, there's the presidents. There's all the presidents there on the bills of money, and you can see that they're destroying what was the republic, the Protestant free republic of America, and in its money system economically, and the rights and our ability to speak freely, to go to church and to make medical decisions for ourselves freely. We're all become wards of the state. You have to understand this is all part and parcel of a reality, because we are defaulting. Our AAA credit rating, our ability to pay back the money that we have borrowed is depreciating and devaluing, so that we don't have the ability. You can see just by doing the as far as 10-year bonds. So bank bonds on Federal Reserve notes of the 10 years are just really there's no curve. There's no value in investing in the money anymore. So less and less people are holding it. Less and less people are going to hold these bonds of future credit lines of American money, because we're devaluating. It's being devaluated by Nancy Pelosi. And then, of course, I don't know what we can say about Trump. He really couldn't get a hold of the bull, and I guess it shook him off. You know what I mean? You only get to ride for 8 seconds, and I guess he couldn't hold on. He couldn't stay onto that bucking the bronco, if you will. And ultimately, he was one of the presidents who added to our debt. That's the record. Despite all the really good things he did, and how incredible, I guess, if you have an economy like that's exploding and it's red hot, I guess those deficits didn't seem so large then. But now we have massive exploding deficits, an economy that's getting ready to just go into free fall. So you can see that not only are we're going to be in stagflation, guys. Welcome to this hell. Welcome to this place. Now, whether you went and voted for Biden or not, they ultimately were going to rip off your election anyway. It didn't matter if you went and voted for Biden or not, because they weren't counting on your vote, because they were going to steal it. And that should bother you. Even if you were like, well, if you were going to vote red or blue, and I guess that's just part of the flashing lights in your mind, like the catharsis in your brain between red and blue, like the Grateful Dead symbol, it's breaking your mind so that you can't decide where there's nowhere for you to stand ultimately, because no matter which way you vote, you're voting against your own interests. So we as American people have to be able to communicate. We have to be able to outstrip all this negativity and make sure that we're in line with people being polite, smiling at people, being engaging, like turning people's days around, like have a wonderful day, so on and so forth. That's the kind of like energy that we need in the culture to be expressing, in as much as it's up to us to learn to find out what the right information is. And with that, we're going to go into some of our segments here. We usually just do like a little news roundup of current events and go through some of the more interesting and powerful discussion and punditry and articles and different kind of conferences and intellectuals that will try to find out what is not allowed to be said and why. And sometimes they censor things for good reason because it's bullshit. But sometimes they don't. Sometimes they take that information and they put it together in a Steele dossier and they send it up through the FISA court chain of commands and sign it on and pretend like they can indict you with this bullshit that they did. It's amazing how many crimes were committed, and you can see it documented in the serious journals of the world that we like to discuss on here all the time. And you can see that no one is doing a damn thing about it, and the American people are being harried, and they're being treated like quarry. They're being hunted by the federal biosecurity state, and we have to be able to question that. We better buy ammo. We better buy weapons. We better be able to defend ourselves against the police just throwing flashbangs, blowing up into our house, and blowing us up with grenades, kicking the door in and shooting us, maybe shoot our family members, and we're not allowed to fight back. We better fight back. We better put these people in their place so that the overreach of the state is punished with the defense of the people, because that overreach is criminal. The overreach of the state is fraudulent, authoritarian, and it's despicable, and it needs to be treated like any other act of aggression by any other. If a grizzly bear just tears into my house, I'm going to try to plug him before he eats me and my family. And it's the same damn thing with this awful, I don't care if it's at county level, I don't care what level it's at, we have to be able to regard these individuals as tyrannists and be able to either vote them out of office or ultimately be able to, if they send out people to destroy us and our families through political means by dragging us into court and trying to just bury us, under their persecution. Political persecution is really what it is. And that's what we're calling into question tonight.
So now we'll drop in here in this discussion and this quick news article. And like we like to do, we will open up the discussion here with the War Room. And Jack Posobiec is going to make some absolutely crucial comments. So let's listen.
Jack, Natalie brought up a good point. And this is why this article in Human Events is so important. And everybody needs not just to read it, you need to share it. There used to be this concept of this construct of elite capture, right? There was a great book came out called Hidden Hand by Clive Hamilton, one of the great investigative reporters in Australia that did the silent invasion about Australia, what the Chinese Communist Party did to kind of get in there, take over their political system, and how the Aussies had to fight back. Then he brought it out to the United Kingdom and to the West, and particularly the United States, about the influence and the elite capture of the Chinese Communist Party, and how Natalie lays out United Front. It's a major part of their three types of warfare, right? But your story takes it to the next level, and I think this is how this is the framework that you need to think about it now, and so many things become evident, right? And that is not elite capture anymore, it's elite merger. What happened after Tiananmen and all those promises that because of our system of free market capitalism and democracy and the values of the Judeo-Christian West, that we were going to change the revolutionary transnational criminal organization of the Chinese Communist Party to our values and our a way of managing states and managing institutions. The exact opposite happened. That in fact our institutions and particularly the people in power saw a model that worked for them. And once every now and again they'd say the cried part out loud. A couple of years ago, Tom Friedman, remember, he wrote that famous article. He says just for a day, he's in Beijing talking to a cab driver like he always does. He said just for a day, I'd like to have the model of the Chinese Communist Party because we could take care of climate change, we could do all this. Your piece is so important because we have to start thinking about this differently. Natalie Winter said it last segment. It's not elite capture. It's now elite merger. I want you to walk us through your piece, Mr. Jack Posobiec.
Steve, now this piece is very important, and it's pinned at the top of humanevents.com. Everybody should go read it and share it if you care about your country, if you care about what's going on. And if you're asking yourselves the question of, because I was asked this all the time before I wrote this, they said, Jack, a lot of people in the U.S., they say, we get it, we get CCP, we get that you were a Mandarin guy, you lived there, you worked at the American Chamber of Commerce, etc., whatever, right? There's so many problems here at home. Why are you talking about China all the time? And this is the piece that explains the connection, right? We've finally gone through and found the nefarious roots of how this came to pass. And what it is, it's an axis of the elites, right? The 1% in the West and the CCP in China. This is the culmination, this view of the past 15 years of my life, what I've seen when I was living and working in China in international business, when I was in the military and the intelligence community, looking at how our country interacted with China primarily through the Obama administration. Country interacted with China primarily through the Obama administration when I was in, and seeing how we would make these sort of in paltry gestures towards, please stop building the islands. We're going to drive a naval vessel past them and really rattle our sabers, but they would continue to build the islands. We would say, please stop building that aircraft carrier. They would continue to build their aircraft carrier. Please stop restricting trade and everything with human rights, etc., etc. And I realized that as this kept going on, when we would send congressional delegations to Shanghai and to the planning committee they have there, right in downtown Shanghai, the Planning Committee Museum, they would learn that through the power of the CCP model, and that you hear everybody from Thomas Friedman now to Charlie Munger saying this just last week. They say, if we could just have that model and have that power, we could get done everything we want done. We could shut down the banking of the deplorables and the little guy. We could shut down the ape army and this economic populism. We could shut down all of these things that we don't want so that we in power could then have the decision. What happened was, instead of infecting China with these ideals of democracy, of liberalism, of the Judeo-Christian West and our values, right? This was part and parcel. This is sort of part of the conversation as to the handover of Hong Kong, right? They would say, well, if Hong Kong goes back to China just in a sovereign way, 50 years, right? They're going to show this model, this system to the rest of China, and they're going to want to embrace it. They're going to break away from the CCP. And you see a little of that, right? A little of that had happened before in 1989, Tiananmen Square. No. The momentum all rolled the other way. The elites were wrong, or perhaps this is what they wanted in the first place. They got a taste of the Chinese power of authoritarianism through the CCP, and they said, you know what, that's what we want to set up now. So you see this in Silicon Valley, you see this in Wall Street, you see it in Washington, D.C., City of London, etc. This is the model they want, and they have now set up the axis of the elites between the 1% in the West and the CCP in China, which if you look at the numbers, about 92 million, that's actually less than 1% of the Chinese population, 1.4 billion. So it's the 1% of the West and the 1% of China, the axis of the elites. Go and read this piece, share this piece.
I want to go back to the third week of January of 2017. There were two speeches given, both that got global coverage. One that was the front page of The Economist, I believe, the front page of the Financial Times of London. It was on the 18th of January 2017, given in Davos by President Xi. And he basically made this speech and talked about globalization, talked about the network effect of globalization. He talked about the wonders of globalization. And he basically said the only problem we have out there is these populists. The problem we got out there is these nationalists. They're the guys, they're the bad guys, they're the xenophobes, they're going to break this up. Standing ovation. And Davos, man, couldn't get enough of it. The party at Davos hailed him as really the leader. A couple of days later, Donald Trump in his inaugural address gave the American Carnage speech, which was really a defense of the Westphalian system, really, which the West has been built on, for 300 years? This idea of the nation states and nation states working together. So it was Trump versus Xi at the very railhead of this intellectually. And the party at Davos, the 1%, absolutely embraced Xi's vision of globalization, further globalization. And here's the key. All of the people there, the bankers, the lawyers, the accountants, all the media experts from around the world, all the media goes to Davos for this kind of winter fest, right? You have all the hedge fund guys, all the commercial bankers, all the top deal lawyers. All of their business is one business. That's the information business. They deal in the information business. Every one of those people knew about the Uyghurs. Every one of them knew about the organ harvesting. Everyone knew about the suppression and what's happened in Tibet and to the Tibetan Buddhists and the followers of the Dalai Lama. Everybody knew about the underground house Christians and the underground Catholic Church. They understood about the suppression of the Tiananmen Square democracy movement. They understood the brutal dictatorship of the Chinese Communist Party on their people as they hailed Xi at that speech on 18 January, I believe it was, 2017, 2 or 3 days before President Trump's inauguration. They knew all of it, and they didn't care. They don't care. That's not their issue. They don't care about any of that. And they, quite frankly, don't care about any of it globally. They detest Lao Beijing, old 100 names. They detest the deplorables. You just get in the way, right? All you are is supposed to be units of consumption and production and nothing else. You have no rights. They don't care what you think. And so the party of Davos has fully embraced.
So you can see right there that ultimately that's a very fascinating discussion, and War Room is one of the leading political broadcasts in the country right now. If you're not listening to it, then you just really you're out of the loop. You have no idea really what's going on. That's up to you to stay informed and maybe to listen to, things that are oppose your personal view. You know what I mean? That's why sometimes you have to listen to people who have different ideas or contrary political beliefs than yours. And so that's what you can kind of stay informed on what other people are thinking. So that's really what it's about. And you can see there that Jack Posobiec is talking about the City of London. And the City of London, again, as we've had to discuss before, is a place where I've never been there. But if you do your homework and find out things about the world, you'll notice that London is a city, a large city in the UK. And there in London is what's called the Square Mile, or the City of London proper, which the capital, the larger outer city of London, is named after. So the inner city of London, which is a private property, a private corporation, a banking monopoly, is a banking district where in this particular zone, the laws about banking are totally different than anywhere else in the world. So that corporations can exist there, large corporations, you can imagine that Chase Manhattan, Morgan Stanley, Brown Brothers and Harriman back in the day, they would have existed and do still exist there in that banking district. And so the City of London is a place that controls a vast amount of resources in a very small place. And in order to get things done, you have to understand the history of London. The City of London goes back to the Roman fort. And we talked about this before, Londinium. When the Romans came that far north in order to fight the barbarians and the Vikings and the tribes that were there, in order to establish Hadrian's Wall there in the UK and to establish civilization from a Roman point of view, and Pax Romana, there the fort of Londinium was set up by the Romans as an outpost. And it was defended and built up from there. And from there on, it has had a special quasi-legal standing in the world. And as you go up through the course of time, ultimately the Knights Templar would establish their holding there in the City of London with their huge banking wealth and actually begin to set up a banking monopoly for the first time in the world. If you go back as far as the 1500s, the 1600s, there the Templars were setting up the ability for merchants and wealthy noble men and the aristocracy to travel the world and to be able to have access to their wealth wherever they would go in different ports. So these notes that they would carry with them, bank bearer notes, would tell the different Templar benches around the world how much value that it was a check. So anyway, I just totally going on this whole tangent here, but the point is that you can see there that the temple bar was set up, and the inner temple and the round temple, and there were the original tombs and establishment and inner enclave of the Templar Knights. And so that nobility, those royal knighthoods, those papal knighthoods, still control the banking industry and the financial sector, as it were, through private corporations. And so it doesn't take a rocket scientist to recognize that the influence of the secret city of London is vast and has a lot to do with what's going on in the world today. And ultimately we have to look at how the CCP is ultimately being supported in many ways by the Democrats in America and by the left, by financiers of BlackRock and Blackstone and Larry Fink and Schwartzman and all these individuals over there just selling out the American people for pennies, devaluating our money and making huge business arrangements with the CCP. These globalists have no problem imagining a world where all the farmland and all the little people and all the plebs and all the common stiffs, the regular working man, common individuals, the peasants, the peasantry of the countryside here in America could be just washed away in order to serve their new communist Chinese partners. And you can see that we're being sold out. Farmers now are being sold out as nitrogen and nitrous and the different kind of things we need to put nitrates in our fertilizer are being risen to 5,000 points above their actual price. So that this is going to kill farmers to keep nutrition and nitrates in their soil so that they can be the breadbasket of the world. And it's outrageous. It's outrageous. It's outrageous what we're dealing with.
So as we're running through this particular syllabus journal entry, we're going to go through some more of the different news articles, the different conversations that are happening. And I'm going through some of my listings as far as the notes that I take when it comes to some of the guests and some of the speakers on War Room. So we're going to go through there and listen to more about this axis of the elites and this concept of elite merger. I think it needs to be proliferated. We need to understand exactly what they're talking about. And as we're doing that, we're going to have to look more closely at this relationship that between the American security apparatus and the American people, as the security apparatus is being directed by globalists who have a lot of influence over think tanks, who have a lot of influence over large-scale commercial banking monopolies, and that's where we had to go back and take a look at the City of London and understand how this particular agenda is moving forward using the globalist apparatus of the United Nations, the World Health Organization, the World Trade Organization, the World Bank, so on and so forth, the Bank of International Settlements. Those are the different institutions which are working hand in glove to implement this new prerogative and agenda of the elites, which is attempting to really ultimately control the world. And we have to be able to open our eyes to that. So here we're going to listen to another clip and discuss this entire matter.
Yesterday we heard from a whistleblower within the U.S. government who reached out to warn us that the NSA, the National Security Agency, is monitoring our electronic communications and is planning to leak them in an attempt to take this show off the air. Now, that's a shocking claim, and ordinarily we'd be skeptical of it. It's illegal for the NSA to spy on American citizens. It's a crime. It's not a third world country. Things like that should not happen in America. But unfortunately, they do happen, and in this case, they did happen. The whistleblower, who is in a position to know, repeated back to us information about a story that we are working on that could have only come directly from my texts and emails. There's no other possible source for that information, period. The NSA captured that information without our knowledge and did it for political reasons. The Biden administration is spying on us. We have confirmed that.
Okay. I'm going to bring in now Darren Beatty from Revolver. I've got Amanda Milius, who's a fighter, did Plot Against the President. She knows all the inside details. Raheem Kassam, founder, editor-in-chief of National Pulse. I got the three hitters I want for this segment, and we're going to roll over. We got Michael Yan in Greece to talk to us about the migrant crisis of 15 and what's happening today about the invasion of the United States. I got to bring you in. Okay, is Tucker Carlson completely paranoid and jumped the shark, or is Tucker Carlson on to one of the biggest stories in this era? I want to start with Darren Beatty, and then we'll go around the table. So, Darren Beatty, you know Tucker. We're going to talk about your explosive story about the 1-6 situation and the Oath Keepers in a second. Let's deal with Tucker. I don't see it on a Chiron at Fox. I don't see anybody reporting on Fox on just the news aspect of it, right? So what's going on, Darren Beatty?
Well, I'm not privy directly to the communication, so I can't state anything as a matter of fact. But I know Tucker, and I have every confidence that this is real, not only by his saying it, simply by the nature of the NSA and what they do. They've lied about this. In fact, I would be shocked if they didn't do it. And I think it's important to remind your audience of the context of this. In the monologue, he proceeded with saying his FBI source told him that there was, in fact, infiltration, that his reporting on the Revolver.News bombshell was vindicated by an FBI source. So this is a very high-stakes game. It's a very dangerous game. It's reached the level where the United States national security apparatus is the enemy of the people, and it's the enemy of a handful of people who have the guts and maybe the craziness to expose them, and Tucker is one of those people. And so I have basically no doubt that this story is true.
Perfectly said, by the way, perfectly said. Amanda Milius, you spent a year of your life making a film about this, about what they tried to do with President Trump. Your thoughts?
Well, I think this is a turning point. I mean, I don't know what it is about the fact that it's, as you say, I'd be surprised if they weren't doing this, but it's an absolute turning point. For me, I'm coming out of this thinking any Republican who doesn't make the fight against the security state and the priority of dissolving them, defunding, and completely restructuring the way the security apparatus of this country is not somebody I can vote for. This is the number one issue in our country.
It should take us back a week or 10 days where we were talking about this story in the New York Times that Tucker Carlson talked to other reporters. Who was that story written by?
Ben Smith.
Ben Smith.
Ben Smithing.
What's Ben Smith otherwise most known for in Washington, D.C. now?
BuzzFeed leaking the report from Comey.
Yeah, the PV dossier.
Yes,
right?
The Steele dossier. He leaked it on so that the other media could pick it up.
So at least from that we know that Ben Smith is very well connected inside these pseudo-intelligence circles, right? These hyper-partisan, politicized, weaponized intelligence circles. So what was it? Who tipped Ben Smith off 10 plus days ago to start looking into who Tucker Carlson was talking to?
Or didn't even made it up? Or are you saying gave him one?
I'm saying if Tucker Carlson has texted with somebody from the Daily Beast, which I don't think anybody in this room hasn't, right? Because they reach out to us and we respond to their questions, their queries, their comments, their criticisms, their nonsense, right?
That's a brilliant point. You're saying you're saying the Ben Smith article is predicated upon NSA.
Yeah, it's communications.
Precisely
that.
What is National
Because what did I say 10 days ago? I said, why would 18 journalists give up one of the best sources they could have?
Big time.
Yeah.
Right here on the show.
Now we know that it wasn't the journalists giving up Tucker Carlson as a source. It was the intelligence services telling Ben Smith, you want to look into who's talking to Tucker Carlson.
Darren Beatty, is Amanda Milius right? Is this the central issue of our time right now between the nationalist populist movement, the deplorables, and the national security state, the apparatus? It's not the permanent political class that's in front doing the pro wrestling on cable TV. Right. This is the real thing, and Tucker's cut to the heart of it.
Yes, and I'd like to kind of refine that a little bit, is to say that basically we won't have a country and all of our politics will be fake and performative until we bring the security state to heel. That is the bottleneck. And I like to think that Revolver.News is at the forefront of this transformation, bringing the populist movement up to speed, specifically that this is the issue, that it's the national security state. And it's not even just the deep state. That was too vague. As you'll recall with the Color Revolution series we did, we refined it. It's not deep state. The Color Revolution was a specific Atlanticist faction within the national security state, and now we've refined it still further in our coverage of January 6th, which again, as I said, is the highest stakes, most dangerous story series that we've ever done. And you see with what Tucker's saying, you see what the stakes really are. This is a battle with the national security state of our own country, and we can see how that ends. We see how that can end for people like Assange. It's not a joke. But unless we bring this under control, our country will not be a real country, will not be a free country, and our politics will be fake and performative, and we will get nowhere.
And people don't understand, this is when it really gets nasty,
right? This is when it really gets nasty. Natalie, while you were out in Oregon traveling, of course, the intelligence report got sent to Biden. Now they're talking about leaking, putting out a declassified. You've had additional reporting. I just want to ask your sense of it, given that they're trying to get past the Wuhan lab, the bioweapons program, and the fact that it was not from nature. They're trying to scramble by this quickly, are they not?
Yeah, the Biden regime is handling the bioterrorists over in Beijing the same way that they're handling the terrorists in Afghanistan, and that is with weakness and incompetence, except in this situation, that weakness, that really inability to hold the Chinese Communist Party to account is derived from, of course, the decades of compromise that we've been documenting extensively at the National Pulse. It's no surprise that the intelligence community of the Biden regime would come out and say that it's really unlikely that both this virus is either a bioweapon or was released via lab accident or from the Wuhan Institute of Virology when Joe Biden's national security advisors, Jake Sullivan, the director of the CIA, is Bill Burns, who's been cozying up to the China-United States Exchange Foundation for over a decade. His deputy secretary of state, the same goes for him, and even the person running his NSA hiring process is a former alum of a Chinese Communist Party-run think tank. If you read this summary, it's a 2-page report. I encourage everyone to read it. But I think that, to me, the most mind-blowing part of this is that there's not even a veiled threat against the Chinese Communist Party for what they've done, to stonewall the process, or even the chance, which at the National Pulse we believe they did release this virus. The best they can say is that, well, the Chinese Communist Party may be hindering an investigation into the origins of COVID-19, and I think that this reflects what we've seen really broadly, not just from the Biden regime, but from NIH, specifically Fauci's NIAID. If these people actually wanted to get to the bottom of COVID-19, they would tell the Chinese Communist Party that not a single cent from American taxpayer dollars will be sent over to fund any collaborative research between these two countries, which we believe that shouldn't be in the first place. If we don't negotiate with terrorists, we shouldn't be funding research with the Chinese Communist Party. But there's just no appetite on behalf of the Biden regime, the scientific community, the intel community, to get to the bottom of this virus because they are so compromised by the Chinese government.
I want to bifurcate these from the intelligence and kind of the policy guys and then the scientists at NIH, because you make an incredibly compelling argument over weeks and weeks and weeks and months now of reporting of how interwoven they are. Do you actually think that their relationships are, they would argue, oh, these are just casual relationships that we have with lots of different people, the policy guys? Do you agree with their spin that we have relationships like this with many, many countries and this is just one, or about the depth and the resonance of these of the deepness of these contacts and relationships? Get about a minute and a half. We're going to hold you over through the break. What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. The Chinese Communist Party is not a silent investor when it comes to real estate, or more precisely when it comes to people, and that's exactly what we've seen. A lot of these influence operations are part of a multi-billion-dollar effort that is linked to China's People's Liberation Army that seeks explicitly to really co-opt and neutralize any American elites who have power in the policy-making process. This is a very, very curated effort, and make no mistake, and I think we'll probably talk about this in the next segment, every individual that you've seen in the mainstream media who's defended the Chinese Communist Party and saying that the virus did not leak from the lab, we've traced back to having some form of either financial or personnel relationship with the Chinese Communist Party, and they are most definitely doing the same thing when it comes to the American government.
I'm going to ask you on the over the break, and in the next segment, we're going to have Natalie Winters. We're going to bring back in Captain Maureen Bennett. But I'm going to ask you, do you? And we're jammed for time, so we'll have you on in addition some other time. But is it this elite capture, or do you agree with Jack Posobiec's theory of the case now that it's elite merger? Natalie Winters from the National Pulse, who's been the tip of the spear in just massive investigation of this and exposed their compromise, the elite's compromise, basically on the payroll of the Chinese Communist Party. So I want to go to Natalie. Winters. Natalie, is this elite capture or is it elite merger?
It's most definitely elite merger. I think we first kind of started talking about this when Charlie Munger said, in his own words, China was right with regards to how they handled Jack Ma. But all the other names that I've listed today, which of course is just scratches the surface, whether it's Jake Sullivan or Bill Burns, they're part of a bigger systemic problem among America's elite, which is the idea, and I think you're seeing this play out in Afghanistan right now, that they stopped believing in America a long time ago, and that's why they were so willing to sell out to the Chinese Communist Party, and that's obviously what managed decline and really the planned obsolescence of the United States is about. And I think that one of my latest stories, the National Pulse, really kind of encapsulates this, which is the idea that one academic, that foreign policy, NPR, Associated Press, all these mainstream outlets have been really vamping her on the airwaves, saying that, oh, this academic says that COVID-19 didn't escape from a lab, it has natural origins. Well, she's actually a former advisor to the Chinese Communist Party, and that she lectured the Central Party School of the regime over in Beijing. She's spoken at a host of Chinese state-run institutions. And this is just the point, that it's not that she's an anomaly. She is the norm. So many of the elites have sold out to the Chinese Communist Party, and COVID-19 is really just the latest example and kind of battlefield for them to show really their ugly heads and how far and how deeply entrenched this compromise is.
I want the camera and Deborah, you played the Economist, the tip sheet for the party of Davos. Where next for global jihad? I think it's a 23-page report. Everybody to get it. This is not the Frank Gaffney version of it, right? This is the elites version of it. Where next for global jihad? Basically everywhere, right? This is the terror superstate. You've got the Chinese Communist Party is now in alignment with Pakistan, now in alignment with the terrorist superstate in Afghanistan, now in alignment with the mullahs in Iran, now in alignment with Turkey, now in alignment with Russia. So you've got this organized criminal group that's going to consolidate the Eurasian landmass. You've got our ally India. On their northwest is one front of this war up in Kashmir, and on the other front is the South China Sea in Taiwan. Natalie, you've been on this. They are, the first thing they're trying to do in this global contest is to basically capture and then merge the elites into their own thinking. I know you're reporting at the National Pulse is way down the road on this, but how, just for our audience of the deplorables, how tough a fight do you think, Natalie Winters, we have in front of us?
I mean, the level of compromise is, I think, at a level that most people don't understand. And especially right now when we're at such a critical time, whether it's COVID-19, Afghanistan, just the way where we are in the world right now, the fact that we have the Biden regime, which as we know shouldn't actually be in power, but the fact that they are in power, it's not a mistake, right? There's a reason that this election was so high stakes for the Chinese Communist Party, because they know we're at such a critical moment in history, and they needed people who were, they've turned 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue effectively into just another Chinese Communist Party embassy or consulate, because the level of compromise and the people who are in there and creating and drafting policy, the outcomes are virtually no different than if you had some Chinese communist apparatchik sitting in there and putting out the policies. I mean, just look, they just approved licensing applications for Huawei. I mean, a company that the Trump administration beat down basically to death, and now they're allowed to kind of re-enter the global stage. That's just one small example, but this really is such a critical time, and we really do have a tough fight ahead of us. But I think with outlets like the National Pulse and War Room and Revolver.news and all these actually independent outlets who cite their sources and are forthright with the experts that they cite where they come from, I think that's how we fight back, because I do believe we have to have hope that the truth will prevail.
So we here in the West, in America, can be profoundly proud of the journalism of Natalie Winters. I think she is 20 years old. I think that she is, since it's publicly known, she is at the University of Chicago, and she's working there for the National Pulse and bringing this information out. And only here in the West do we value all of our citizens. And that means that we also value all of our women citizens. And in other places in the world, it's not the case. Maybe if you're from Tajikistan, or maybe even if you're in China, your parents really, really want a son. And if they have a daughter, they might take the daughter and
and just drop her in a well, and then try again to have a son, because having a son is the most important thing. I think that that's the kind of vibe that maybe you'll find in Saudi Arabia, other places in the world, but here in the West, in the profoundly wise and superior Western civilization, we have the wherewithal to inspire our young women to become the greatest women in the world. That's right. America has the smartest, most educated, most talented, most gifted, and most liberated and set free to pursue the prerogative of their own heart's desire and destiny, in as much as that they can become great surgeons and great warriors in the military, great pilots, or just anything that a woman wants to become in America, she can become. And so that's what's so amazing, and that's why it makes us so proud. I mean, someone like Natalie Winters, we have to be astonished at her intellect and her courage. So, be that as it may, we'll continue on here with, you can see the scope of the point that we're trying to make, and we have to rely so heavily on so many other people who are sharing with us their thoughts at a time when being honest is probably, a punishable offense. I think that our thought life is being criminalized to some extent, to the place where the politics is becoming so overwrought and bloody. I really want to kind of cue in and focus in like a microscope on the issue of the politicization of the intelligence agencies and the intelligence community itself. And I guess the college level academic graduates who populate the bureaucracy in Washington, D.C. have all come to the superior conclusion, because of their uniquely larger brain and intellectual advancement, that the rest of the Walmart shoppers, remember Peter Strzok, the FBI, that they're bullies, right? I mean, isn't that, I'm starting to get the vibe that these people are totally fascistic, hyper-violent bullies who are prepared to use their guns and the presupposition of the lawfulness of their cause to attack the American citizenry. So it reminds me of Ruby Ridge all over again. It reminds me of Waco, Texas, when you can't get the people to come out and do and be the way you want them to be and believe the way you want them to believe, then you just burn them all alive, right? Isn't that what happened with Madeleine Albright and Clinton and the whole thing? I mean, this is a place in American history that has become a critical moment for the people to recognize what's happened. I think that, and I remember when we were dealing with the mass opiate epidemic, and I'm sure that there's still people that are struggling with opiate addiction, but these are the different ways that they find to destroy, to castrate, to erode and undermine the self-esteem and the self-empowerment of the American people and the American individual, so that people can't stand their own. They're all on food stamps. They're all addicted to Roxycontins, and they smoke Marlboro Reds, and they drink beer, and they got to watch the football game. They got to have their turkey on Turkey Day. They got to have all these illusions and chemical addictions and the different things that just weaken, demoralize, and destroy the American people, so that when it comes time for them to raise up and be mighty and fierce and stand up for human liberty and freedom and for the cause of the American Constitution against tyranny, they can't do it. They're hiding in their homes. They can't get off their soft couches to fight the battle of liberty. And so that's really what you're seeing here, is you're seeing that there are people willing in the media, in academia, scientists, Dr. Malone, people who are willing to present the truth, and they have to face the airplane propeller blade of the media, and now the DOJ, weaponized intelligence agencies, the weaponized FBI, who are going to, remember we had the issue there in the Michigan Capitol where they decided that there was a conspiracy to kidnap Governor Whitmer and Gretchen Whitmer, and when they turned around, there was 15 guys sitting there with this conspiracy to kidnap her, and when they counted it all out, 11 of them were FBI agents. And the rest were just some dupes that they found, like some kind of idiotic Alcoholic Anonymous meeting where they just find some dupes, some morons to come in and discuss and gripe about Gretchen Whitmer, and when they present the plot to kidnap them,
if they just, if they went away in any kind of way, didn't just get up and leave and call the police, then the FBI had roused themselves up a case of kidnapping against the governor. And so that's what the FBI is going to do. They're going to constantly try to create crimes that they can pin on other people. They wanted to create the bomb that went off in the World Trade Centers in 1993, right? They blamed on terrorists. Apparently terrorists got the bomb that blew up the World Trade Centers in 1993 from the FBI. And so this is the issues. And even the discussion of this on this podcast makes me a target. And if you get pissed off about finding out this information for yourself, learning the truth, because you didn't watch CNN one time and you came over and you found out that people are discussing urgent, emerging, difficult realities and having to take their future livelihood and their lives into their hands because of the threat of the government and the government bureaucracy from Washington, D.C., we have a major problem. We have a major problem that we need to discuss. And in order to do that, let's go and talk about elite capture and elite mergers some more. And before these people flush us all into the net, into the fowler's net, we, the peasants, the common people, the regular folks, your regular county sheriff, your regular firemen, the regular Marines that come home from war, who begin a militia, or even school teachers who don't want to embrace the liberal neo-Marxist BLM brainwash to the kids, or people who already got COVID, have natural immunity, and don't want to take a whole series of experimental vaccines that don't work. I mean, if they did work, you wouldn't need 5 boosters. So you're not going to convince people that were smart enough not to take it now, right? People are resisting, and the punishment for resisting is going to become more extreme as we go forward. So I want to talk more about elite merger. So let's take a listen.
But I got to talk about our current situation. As big as the Afghanistan fiasco is, and these numbers are imploding all over, we're going to have additional analysis of the status of the Biden regime and what the American people think of it, because it's been weighed and measured. Okay, and I've never seen numbers like this rapidly. When you think about the social media oligarchs protecting this guy, when you think of the media protecting him, and he's down across the board, everything from the handling of the COVID, CCP virus, everything. And what we can't do now, and that's why the California front is so important, to get competitive about recalling Gavin Newsom, is that we can't allow them to try to transform the country, particularly financially. That's what they're going to try to do. They're going to try to do such enormous things to the balance sheet of the nation and the balance sheet of the Federal Reserve that we can never pull it back. Now that he has no political capital, it's going to take the war room posse to do that. In addition, or kind of part of it, is that we've got now, and Politico had this story up today that really, and I'll say it blew my mind, but it was so straightforward and honest, not trying to hide things, that I found it kind of startling. It basically said that big business, Wall Street, and the lobbyists, with the Chamber of Commerce, the Business Roundtable, the CEOs thing, and the China Business Association, all these big lobby groups, not just individual lobbyists for the companies, but the big trade unions, the industry lobbyists, and the Chamber of Commerce, are working these global corporations. And now the progressive Democrats, the most progressive of the groups, Omar, all of it, the most progressives, are all working together to make sure that we thwart what they call getting into a new Cold War on the economics with the Chinese Communist Party. Look, you have to understand something. They believe in the warfare that is unrestricted warfare, which you have cyber and information warfare, you have economic warfare, and you have what they call kinetic war, which is shooting. And we're quickly hurtling towards a kinetic war, and kind of the left flank of that is going to be up in Kashmir with our ally India. You've got Pakistan, you got the terrorist superstate Afghanistan, you've got Persia or Iran with the mullahs, and the Chinese Communist Party up there. The right flank of that is Silicon Valley West, which is Taiwan and the South China Sea, where 60% of the world's goods go through, because we are a Pacific power. We have to remain a Pacific power. So that's the kinetic part. They're already at economic war with us, or information war with us. A young woman from the University of Chicago has done better than anybody in this town
about doing the hard investigative work to get to the bottom of it and to show the interlinking relationships. This is why I say it's not a conspiracy, because we see it. It's the way the system works, and they have a very highly refined system. And now, for the hypocrisy, because you got to remember, we have the moral high ground against this transnational criminal organization. The biggest progressive groups are in business with them to protect them. And here's the reason. At their core, these progressive groups are Marxist, right? Are Marxist. Now, the CCP is not Marxist in its economic philosophy. It's state capitalism, and they get the vigorish, the slave labor of Lao Beijing, suffers the consequences and creates the value. They take Western capital to do it. But you have progressive groups that are Marxist to their core, that are in business with the Chamber of Commerce, the Business Roundtable, the CEO conferences, the China Business Relationship. If you read Natalie Winter, you go to Raheem Kassam's National Pulse and read Natalie Winter's investigative report, and you go, oh yeah, I remember that. Natalie said that. Natalie had that 6 months ago. But she actually goes down and shows you the receipts. She not only shows you the conferences that they go to, right, but she shows you who was there, how they spoke, and what they got paid. And it's twofold. You have both a foreign policy national security apparatus, or threefold, a business kind of apparatus of the economists, and then you have the public health, which she's exposed better than anybody, with Fauci and all these public health guys, World Health Organization. This is the globalist system. This is the globalist system. And it is absolutely anti. If you don't think it's traitorous, they betrayed their country, Politico shows it right there. Oh, we got to the China, we got to take care of the CCP, we got to take care of China, right? And it's a mix. Now, here's the interesting thing. That group, when you read that article, I want this article in every chat room. I want you to read it. I want you to pass it around. And if you go back to what we put in before, it is exactly the same groups that are in Molly Ball's cover story of who stole this election. And Biden stealing the election. They brag about it. It's the big global corporations. It's the Chamber of Commerce, one of the biggest things they put their shoulder to the wheel. And the progressive groups. The same guys. So look, Mike Lindell says, hey, they hacked the machines. I don't know. He's got to prove that. He says he is. He's working on it. Right? He's talking to secretaries of state now. He's working on the data. And so the Dominion guys, hey, I don't know. I'm not a machine guy. There's a big spread between the bid and the ask. But here's what I know. We have today, this ain't on the war room. This is not the National Pulse. Right? This is not the Daily Caller. Right? This is not, this is not some far extreme. This is not Citizen Free Press or Gateway Pundit. No, it's Politico. And they report it. It's a matter of fact. Hey, this is a new force in town. So, Natalie Winters, I want you to, first off, just your assessment. Since you do so much of the grind, you got another beautiful article up that dovetails this perfectly. I want to get to in a second. But just your thoughts. When Politico puts this out this morning, it was kind of, hey, this is what they really got to get focused on to kind of save China from these horrible trade deals that, Biden's kind of, because the numbers are so positive on him, he doesn't want to pull them off. Natalie Winters.
Well, they were saying the quiet part out loud, but to anyone who's watched The War Room or read my articles at the National Pulse, the quiet part really isn't so quiet. I think this article really undergirds the thesis that guides a lot of my reporting at the National Pulse, and frankly, more broadly, my worldview, which is that there is a sect of American society, call it the elite, call it the establishment, call it the permanent political class, who have benefited immensely from the rise of the Chinese Communist Party, and they will do anything to secure market access and be able to have their companies and send their jobs overseas. You were talking about polling. There was a very interesting poll that came out about 2 months ago from the Trafalgar Group, which again is a respectable outlet, and they found that 89% of Americans viewed that the Chinese Communist Party's influence in America, really society as a whole, was at a concerning level. And at first, when I read that poll, I thought, wow, that's a great number. Maybe a lot of people are reading the National Pulse and watching The War Room, but that outstanding 11%, I really think, is revealed in this article, right? It's the people at the Chamber of Commerce, it's people at the U.S.-China Business Council, the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations, all these people who should be registered foreign agents, much like Hunter Biden, but of course they're not. But I think this really just speaks to our worldview, and I think, frankly, the globalist agenda of open borders works two ways, right? It's not just that they want cheap labor and open immigration controls. They also want that border to be open so American industry and jobs and manufacturing capabilities can be sent all across the world, but principally to China.
Okay, so on top of this, of course, the great Natalie Winters, who never stops working. By the way, you're out in Oregon. You're all over the country giving speeches and giving presentations. But talk to us about the new story that's up on National Pulse, because it dovetails. It's like you knew the Politico thing was coming out, and you kind of waited to drop it on top and say, hey, they gave you the overview and some quotes. I'm going to give you the receipts.
Well, I have a couple of stories out today, but I assume you're talking about an older piece that I sent over to Cameron, which has to do with who Joe Biden's ambassador to China is. But this is someone who has worked with the U.S.-China Business Council, Nicholas Byrne, so the guy who is now leading the Biden regime's approach to China, dealing with all these critical issues, is someone who worked at the Cohen Group, which is a consulting firm that not only is a member of the U.S.-China Business Council, but has actually sponsored their annual galas. Really an insane connection there, and I think a lot of people like to ask the question, who's pulling the strings in the Biden regime? But I think that framing of how D.C. works is frankly inaccurate, right? Because it's not just the president or whoever is allegedly, we would say incorrectly elected, gets to determine what United States policy is. There's all these kind of underground influences, right? These lobbying groups, and frankly, they're not even underground that much anymore. This Politico article really kind of shines the light on that. But these are the people who are, determining personnel, getting to determine policy. But real quick, the other story that I have up today has to do with Hill House Capital, which people may be familiar, not only because they're an investor in Amazon and Zoom and a lot of these, companies that you probably unwittingly use every day, but this is a firm that is backed pretty extensively in seed capital, not only from Yale University, but they actually manage money for 6 of the top U.S. universities as well as Canadian pension funds, and they actually just partnered on what it seems to be $1 billion venture with a Chinese state-run investment firm over in Hangzhou province, which I think really, again, just speaks to this Politico article, which is the idea that a lot of these, American institutions, the ones that lecture people like us as being deplorables, which fundamentally at heart, I think, are Marxist, really are putting their money where their mouth is, and they're defending and propping up a regime. And lastly, just real quick on that Politico article, it's kind of interesting because I think they strawman our article or our argument against doing business with China, but more precisely the Chinese Communist Party. The human rights abuses are the tip of the iceberg, right? It's also about the Chinese Communist Party's broader agenda to really overtake the United States, kick us out of any power structure, and at the end of the day, they're a communist regime, and I don't think that any American corporation should be doing business with them, even independent of the human rights abuses.
Given that you've probably done more detailed analysis of how this all operates in whether it's in Davos and Geneva here in the United States, this theory that Jack Posobiec, I got to ask you, we got a couple minutes. Are we in a situation of elite capture, which for years Clive Hamilton and others have looked at? Or does your reporting, as you see it, do you believe it is now elite merger?
Well, I think the Biden regime really answers that question for you. When you look into the people who are working there, and I'm not just talking about our ambassador to China, even take our Secretary of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack, for example. He's someone who's headlined several events for the U.S.-China Business Council. I think I had said it before on a previous Warren episode. I talked about how, pattern recognition is really what guides a lot of my reporting. And I really think that at this point, there are just too many coincidences for it not to be some sort of broader conspiracy between the Chinese Communist Party and really the American elites. And I use that word conspiracy in its definitional sense, in that elites from both countries really benefit when the Chinese Communist Party is emboldened. And I think that's reflected in that polling I was talking about, where a very small segment of American society is pleased with the Chinese Communist Party broadening their influence over American society. And there's more and more instances, I think, like this Politico article, like that Charlie Munger interview, even an interview from 2020 with Joe Biden's ambassador to China, Nick Burns, where he says in reference to China, we can't see them as the enemy because we need them. Or Joe Biden says, quote, China's rise isn't our demise, all the way back in 2011. And I think that when you interpret this regime's conduct with China as one of mutual benefit, right? I think the Chinese Communist Party has benefited immensely from what's going on in Afghanistan. I think there is purpose behind that, and I think that we're really seeing the damages of that now, not just in Afghanistan, but really in every sector of policy.
Okay, so I really had to let that entire segment play out so we could hear the context and the direction of the conversation, and really just let the entire thing play out. And sometimes I like to take little excerpts, and in this case, I felt like we had to just play that little interview in its entirety so we could pay attention more closely to how the direction that the research is going, as far as I guess the information is there, but no one is reporting. So it's just a matter of where are you getting your news, and ultimately, like, are you at the Macy's Day Parade? Are you just having hot dogs? Are you paying attention to really what's happening within the sovereign borders of the United States of America? And we have major issues that we're really needing to deal with as far as the nature of authority, and we have to question, these people have taken an oath to uphold the Constitution, and so this is a major difficulty when you can see that traitors and intelligence assets of foreign governments and people who have been owned by Russian and Chinese spies with information. I mean, just think about how the whole Jeffrey Epstein thing is just kind of like a silent bomb going off, and it's no one wants to discuss it, and the information's being suppressed. And you Google, all the apps on your phone are going to make sure that you can't get a clear view on the reality. It's fascinating to see how incredibly difficult it is for people to communicate now. I mean, it looks like that emails are being intercepted. There's a lot of different reporting going on. So that it's we're in a technotronic state, and the technocracy doesn't have to cooperate with the users, and it's not going to. So I think it's better that we learn how to get a stamp and write a letter in an envelope and mail it to each other, and it's the same difficulty there, and wanting to make sure that we can have the ability to communicate clearly without being interrupted by others. I just wanted to put that into perspective, and I think that it's important for these new voices to have the platform that's necessary to awaken and inform the American people. And to that very end, we're working very diligently here at the Syllabus Journal to bring you new journal entries to keep you updated on what's been happening and what's the most important and the highlights of the most central information, your intelligence briefing, if you will. And I think that we have to really look at all different aspects far and wide, and to see what there is available to see that isn't yet being suppressed or censored, and I think in many ways we have to recognize that our own voices are being manipulated when it comes to social media and the algorithm and our ability to express ourselves. And I think that we have to recognize that as the technology advances, that there'll be new ways for the authoritarian state, the party of Davos, who really own these billionaire technocrats, these tech giant elitists. And in many ways, we can see that it seems like to me that during World War II, that there was a lot of elite power groups at the time that were taking advantage of the circumstances. Even Hitler himself was a provocateur, like we stated many times. He was an Austrian from Austria, so that's Vienna. I mean, he's coming from Vienna, and he is somehow going to be introduced as the chancellor de jure, like the right guy at the right time, and he's of course going to be introduced by the famous Knight of Malta, Franz von Papen. And Franz von Papen is going to actually be the vice chancellor, the vice president, if you will, to Hitler, and he's going to be the connection. He's going to be our connector to the larger program, the larger combination, the larger agenda. And I think in a lot of ways, the way that they handled the liquidation of the Jewish population out of Germany and really out of Europe, and killed 7, 8, 10 million, nobody really knows the number at that point, just becomes a blur. But I think you can see the way that they had the people ready to show documents. These are the Jewish people They're ready to wear the gold star. They're ready to put the sign on their business. They're ready to put the placard up. Whatever it takes to placate the state. And by degrees, over a course of years, little by little, they have them to where we get to the night of broken glass, where they're really going to push all the Jews into ghettos for their own safety, and then they're going to transport the Jews to another place for their safety. And during this time, when they line up to be transported, they bring their suitcases and their valuables, and they dress in their Sunday best. They bring their children. And many get the signal and they flee, but others just trust the state. And they get in the trains, and that's it. That's the end. I think that's the same experience that we're really having here globally in the West, and just nation by nation in a large scale. I think in a large scale way, we're being liquidated, and our nations and our laws and our constitutions and the different systems of law that we operate by are being deconstructed before our eyes. And I think it's hard for people to understand the scale of the conspiracy here, ultimately coming out of the globalist sector of the United Nations, the World Economic Forum. These individuals, the Klaus Schwabs of the world, have planned well, and I think that people are going to line up to take whatever the government hands out, whatever they're instructed to take, because they're terrified. And they'll line up to enter into the FEMA camps. They'll line up to get in line to go to their liquidation, to their own destruction. And I think that's the devastating reality that we're facing here as we go into 2022. You can see that this fella, General Flynn, I'm inclined not to trust anyone. Not ever, not for any reason. It comes back to the old thing when you're in the playground in kindergarten and the kid says, close your eyes and open up your mouth, and I won't put the worm in there. I won't put the worm in your mouth. Just close your eyes and open your mouth and trust me. And then when you get into that area of trust, that's when you're going to fall and fail. And that's ultimately, trust should not be required. Everyone should be able to keep their eyes open and watch clearly and see clearly. There shouldn't be any blind spots where we have to open up our hearts and use trust in order just to take somebody's word for it, take the government's word for it. I think that's beyond the ability at this point for many people. And you can call it paranoia, you can call it whatever you want to call it. But and where I'm coming from, I'm not taking any medicine from Washington, D.C. Not one single Advil will I take from them. I'm not going to take any of their advice. I'm not going to follow any of their directives. Right here in my county, there's plenty of laws about, people who they shall not assault one another. They shall not steal each other's cars. They shall not commit murder. And in our county, if you do those crimes, you'll get put into jail, into prison. And that's all I need. I need this county. I need this state. And I don't need Washington, D.C. And the same for you. You're getting confused by the different complex of governments that you have in your life, and you need to recognize that everything that's coming out of Washington, D.C. is fouled, it's poisoned, and it's contaminated, and you shouldn't deal with it anymore. And so God help whoever we send there to be representatives, because ultimately I think that these are the same people that come back to us talking out of both sides of their mouth with their pockets full of cash printed off the printer. They still smell the fresh ink. And I think that in many ways, this is the kind of corruption that we're dealing with. So the danger now, we're looking at the Thanksgiving weekend here in 2021. We're going into 2022. I think I have my fingers up in quotations. I think it is going to happen in 2022 as we're going into the new year. I think that right now the S&P, or the futures market, just dropped to 700 points because there's a new variant that came out from South Africa, a South African variant. So I think that General Flynn was just talking about that 2 or 3 days ago, and that was my comment that I made about trust. I don't know if I need to trust these individuals, but I'm listening to the words, the vernacular, the rhetoric that's coming out, and I can see that on many levels they're not going to quit. You can hear the threats from Bill Gates about the viruses, and we'll just take a few minutes and listen to that. I think we'll take a few minutes and just listen to the threat that Bill Gates makes regarding the vaccination and just this biomedical security state that we're all supposed to just fold up our sleeves and bust out our vein, and just whatever the government wants to pop into us, we're just ready to just receive vaccines all day and night. And I think that's the kind of perception that they're putting out, that we should just all be ready. Like, you should look in Germany, you can't get on a train unless you have a mask and have papers. In Austria now, they're celebrating over there because they've locked down everyone who doesn't want to take the vaccine because it's terrifying. You're taking your life into your hands, and there's no telling, like, with the sophistication they have now, there's no telling where those vaccines came from. Is it a lottery? Is one in every 10,000 vaccines just like an execution dud? I mean, what's happening there? Are these different nanotechnologies they're putting in us so they can just give people heart attacks randomly whenever they want? We're seeing people just dropping dead all over the culture. And, of course, these pharmaceutical companies have no responsibility. And there's really no ability within the populace to find a regulatory agency or an intelligence agency or a law enforcement branch of any kind of these departments that will help us. I think this is going to be a straight out and out, total democide. I think that they're going to deceive on every level, just like what happened in World War II with Hitler. The staggering, horrifying reality was what, at the very end, the level of deception and subterfuge that they used against the people in order to destroy them. For ulterior motives, or other reasons, other than what the straightforward reason we were supposed to be at war. We were supposed to be at war for these straightforward reasons, but in the background, the war was used to cover up a different crime. And I think that's what you're seeing today with the Reichstag virus. Right now we have the Reichstag virus, and behind the collateral chaos and damage of all that, they're going to commit other crimes. So let's listen to Bill Gates' direct and indirect threat to the world populations regarding vaccines.
The information restrictions by the tech oligarchs. So Dr. Naomi Wolf put us into, because we're right in the middle of it again now, put us in perspective. You were the first one to call this about the vaccine passports, a year ago? You told us this was going to happen, and now they're bringing out the heavy guns to say all the misinformation people are criminals. Dr. Naomi Wolf.
Sure. Well, the Hydra's head is definitely being revealed. I think that we have to listen to these clips side by side with the fact that the FBI and a SWAT team with a battering ram raided the home of a journalist. I don't agree with the politics of the founder of Project Veritas necessarily, but as a journalist, I'm absolutely chilled to the bone that the FBI confiscated a working journalist and editor's, phone and journalistic notes, and is putting pressure on a journalist to disclose his sources. These things are related, and so now what we've got is kind of bullying at the very highest levels. Bourla, the CEO of Pfizer, made it clear that he was in alignment with the FBI and the CIA, and that they were on his side, warning him about these dark forces who would be saying, bad things about vaccines, or maybe trying to hack Pfizer. I don't know. Obviously, there are criminal acts when you're hacking a company, but he's definitely kind of trotting out the intelligence agencies and the law enforcement agencies to say, we've got them on our side. And there are other really chilling things that are happening. The clip you showed revealed, which I knew a year ago by reading Moderna's website, that this is not a vaccine. It doesn't inject a piece of the disease, that like smallpox vaccines, like every other vaccine, and it triggered an immune response from your body's natural immunity. Rather, it is a messenger RNA that changes every cell in your body. This is from the Moderna website. This is their claim to a competitive advantage over traditional vaccines. So now this clip shows it, and the clip I just watched of Bourla kind of confiding in a representative of the Atlantic Council, which we should talk about how, way back in January of 2020, he was aware of COVID in China. His people were at risk, and his scientists came to him, and BioNTech came to him and said, look, we've got these mRNA technologies. We want to use the mRNA technology, which is gene therapy, to address this infectious disease pandemic. In this interview, which I literally just watched, Bourla calls this highly risky, that it it was a highly risky decision. He points out that they've never used this in a vaccine before. People are always saying mRNA has been studied for a long time. It has. But Bourla himself said in this interview, this is not just the first COVID vaccine that uses mRNA. It is the first mRNA vaccine, and we're going to take the risk and use it. And he's celebrating with his interlocutor from the Atlantic Council. He also notes that the moment he realized he really had to get on this was when he realized the Economic Forum, which I believe refers to the World Economic Forum, right? Build Back Better, was canceled and had to be run digitally. So I think what you're hearing is that, or what you're seeing is a convergence of disclosures of who these bad actors are at the very top of the pyramid, right? World Economic Forum, Atlantic Council, which is a really interesting entity we need to talk about. You've got Pfizer, you've got BioNTech, you've got Gates also, not coincidentally, at around the same time, a couple of days ago, giving a shocking interview, which I read as kind of a threat to the world, a threat to the world's governments, in which he basically says, okay, those vaccines didn't work that well, but we're going to keep identifying emerging pathogens, we're going to keep identifying emerging pandemics, and we're going to have germ games, and I'm sure, and that's going to take billions of dollars from world governments, and I'm sure people around the world will want their governments to give us billions of dollars to prevent the next even worse pandemic. So to me, that sounded like, you know, he's trying to take us hostage and warn us that there's worse to come if those billions of dollars are not provided. Who is going to give this software mogul the right to have germ games with even more lethal pathogens under normal circumstances? No one in their right mind. So I think what's really interesting is all of these guys have kind of stopped pretending. They've stopped pretending that the vaccine is something that people will embrace willingly without coercion and lies. They're bullying, they're threatening. Journalists are being intimidated. The Dirty Dozen are being intimidated. And I just think it's really noticeable. They're kind of taking the mask off and basically saying, yeah, this was super risky. Yeah, no one's ever done this before with mRNA. But we thought, great opportunity.
No. The deaths, it's been completely horrific, and I would expect that will lead the R&D budgets to be focused on things we didn't have today. We didn't have vaccines that block transmission. We got vaccines that help you with your health, but they only slightly reduce the transmission. We need a new way of doing the vaccines. We didn't get much in the way of therapeutics. Dexamethasone and now molnupiravir could help, but way less than should have been the case. We didn't get the diagnostics up and running in order to, achieve what at least Australia and New Zealand showed, that competent management could keep the death rate down pretty dramatically. And so I'm hoping in 5 years I can write a book called, We Are Ready for the Next Pandemic. But it'll take tens of billions in R&D that the US and the UK will be part of that. It'll take probably about $1 billion a year for a pandemic task force at the WHO level, which is doing the surveillance and actually doing what I call germ games, where you practice. You say, okay, what if a bioterrorist brought smallpox to 10 airports? How would the world respond to that? That there's naturally caused epidemics and bioterrorism caused epidemics that could even be way worse than what we experience today, and yet the advances in medical science should give us tools that we could do dramatically better. So you'd think this would be a priority. The next year will be where those allocations have to get made, including this global pandemic task force. The nice thing is a lot of the R&D we need to do to be ready for the next pandemic are things like making vaccines cheap, having big factories, eradicating the flu, getting rid of the common cold, making vaccines just a little patch you put on your arm, things that will be incredibly beneficial even in the years when we don't have pandemics. So, along with the climate message and the ongoing fight against disease of the poor, the pandemic preparedness is something I'll be talking about a lot. And I think
it'll find fertile ground because, we lost trillions of dollars and millions of lives, and, citizens expect their governments not to let that happen again.
So, in the words of our co-host, you can see that the brazenness of the agenda here is getting completely, just like Dr. Naomi Wolf said. I think the mask is off. I think now these are threats that they're in control of whatever context that medical science might take, whatever narrative that needs to drive the idea of scientism is going to be something that they use as a weapon against the people of the world. So we're going past the American people are just really in the way. But I think the agenda is to get to a global government, to get to an absolute police state where the presupposition is that you are either going to comply or you're a disease vector or a bioterrorist. So if you're sick and you go to the airport, now you're a bioterrorist. I think this is the kind of language that they're ultimately going to use as far as a global pandemic task force. It's just another World Health Organization. It's another World Bank. It's another United Nations. It's another component. It's another UNESCO. It's another component institution within their global apparatus. And I think that it's about control. It's about absolute control over every passport holder, every port that you might try to pass through, every airport gate, every kind of train station, everywhere where a person might want to engage and travel and to become to be a part of the society. I think they're going to have gateways and security entrances, and they're going to scan you, and they're going to test you, and they're going to expect you to have all the current vaccinations, whatever that is. And just like Dr. Naomi Wolf pointed out, these vaccines are mRNA gene therapy, and they're not vaccines. So just even the idea of coming out with the new definitions that you're not up to date on. So just the definition of what a word means, the actual context by which a word can be used to derive a certain meaning is being altered and changed all the time. You can see they're starting to manipulate dictionaries in different ways, and they're just trying to control the language, and that's a lot of control. And this is something, a hidden, invisible committee that's running these programs, and I guess it goes beyond the deep state now, because it's a globalist apparatus that's seeking to deconstruct every nation, every democratic nation in the world. And so it's worse than communism, because ultimately, even with communism, on some level you had a choice. On this level, they're going just to reorient and reinvent the boundaries and the borders of countries and society. I think they'll move towards a North American Union. You can see that the British Empire did the same thing in World War I when they defeated the Ottoman Empire. They just redrew the map, and they reconstructed all the nations. They came up with Iran and Iraq and Saudi Arabia. And we talked about this before. Jordan, Lebanon, all the different nations of the world were, as far as in the Middle East, were established at that time. And once they'd just been one collective Ottoman Empire, now they were going to be broken down into different nation states and shattered into different individual pieces so that they could be more easily controlled. And of course, they would raise up different monarchs. So you'd have the king of Jordan, you'd have the king of Saudi Arabia, you have the king of this and the king of that. And the point is that that's where their mind and their heart is. It's in monarchical, authoritarian, absolute dictatorship. So that the king is the divine ruler who's been appointed by the Vatican, and all the people have to bow and kiss the ring. And that's how it works. That's the extent of your ability to vote in any kind of ballot. Remember, voting in a ballot is something that was, as far as democracy, was something that was that still exists within the Freemason Lodge. So when you go into the Freemason Lodge, everyone is going to have a vote on whether you can enter. If you're an initiate and an apprentice, and you can enter into the lodge, and they will vote with a white stone and a black stone. And they'll put the white stone in, or they'll put the black stone in. And if you have a black stone in the ballot, then it's not unanimous, and you're not allowed to enter. You're not allowed to be initiated. So this is the kind of democracy that was established by our forefathers and the patriots who fought in the American Revolution, and they established this kind of democracy for the purpose of empowering all the people so that they would have the ability to direct their own government, and they wouldn't be just ruled over by some kind of looming, arrogant, unimpeachable monarch. Okay, so I think that the king, the authority of the Kingdom of England at that time was something that people had a vote whether they were going to accept it, and at least they did in the colonies. And you have to recognize that the Kingdom of Britain had come a long way since the Glorious Revolution, since William of Orange, since old Queen Elizabeth, Queen Bess, who was a Protestant queen, Elizabeth I. And of course, King James was of course siding with the Protestant cause when he allowed the King James Bible to be printed out. And he was almost blown up in the gunpowder plot. We'll do an episode about the gunpowder plot coming up soon, because people don't know anything about it, and they like to wear the Guy Fawkes masks, because you guys are brainwashed victims. You're the victims of psychological operations, and when somebody tries to tell you about it, you just put wax into your ears and you shove it in deep so you can't hear, because it's a conspiracy theory, and you just go get your shot from the government because you want to feel better. You want the negative energy and the disturbing forces of questioning, the debilitation of your cognitive dissonance. It has to be kind of broken away, and it's very uncomfortable. It's a very uncomfortable process to learn that you have a reality bias. In as much as that you will not accept the difficulty of the circumstances of reality, so you can go back to watch Big Bang Theory or just whatever show comforts you in what you want to believe. You're allowed to believe anything you want, so don't let the truth get in the way. So we have to continue on here. This is another interesting article that we have to introduce. We feel like we're obligated to point this out to you, and we want to make it clear where the impetus and where the actual origin, the epicenter of the agenda and the plan to bring the world down and bring democratic nations and bring down Republican institutions in the West and popularly held government, to bring those down has been a plan that was operating inside the aristocracy, within the elite of Europe for a long time. So we need to realize that that many power players, many elite globalist factions, think tanks, entrepreneurs, leaders of industry, are working hand in glove, working on a clandestine effort to use China as a weapon against the West. And you can see that that's coming along swimmingly. And so we need to go in and take a closer look here. And I want to look at the Dana Lass show. The Dana Lass show, because she's going to point out how the Imperial College, the Royal Scientific Establishment of London, worked with the CCP in order to implement, instigate, and assault popular government around the world and individual liberties. Bills of rights, constitutional governments, democracy around the world was absolutely crushed by this move. There was an orchestration of Tony Fauci and the CCP in funding this abomination in the lab, and then allowing it to become a huge international bioweapon, an international incident, which ultimately is a biological weapon used against the entire world. And you can see that the actual analysis and the stratification of the world's response and the actual authority that would pin some kind of semblance of authenticity and bona fides on this huge pandemic, with Jesuit Fauci as the spokesperson up there and up front, would be the Imperial College. And you can see that out of the Imperial College would be the influence of the City of London establishment, power structure. And that's what we have to really discuss.
Well, Simon, today the Ministry of Health added another death to its COVID-19 recording, but also said it was a case subject to a police investigation that's ongoing. Now, One News understands that this is in relation to Operation Metals, a homicide investigation launched after a man named Robert Hart sustained serious gunshot injuries outside a Newland motel last week, and he died despite first aid attempts. Now, since his death, health authorities say he tested positive for for COVID-19, and One News understands that several people are also isolating. So then you have to ask how someone who sustained these types of injuries and then died ends up as part of our COVID-19 death tally. Now, the Ministry of Health says that's because under the World Health Organization guidelines, anyone who dies while also having an acute COVID-19 infection is recorded as part of a nation's death tally, whatever the cause of death might be. Now, exactly how this man died will be subject to an ongoing police investigation as well as an investigation by the coroner. And meanwhile, 3 people have been charged in relation to the death, and police are still hunting for a 4th.
But he was listed as a COVID death. That's in New Zealand. I can't do that accent. Welcome back to the Dana Show. Dana Radio. Good to be with you. This Friday, I got some... we've been talking about the Russia being skeevy, and Lukashenko over in Belarus being skeevy, war drum sounding. I want to jump into this real quickly with the coronavirus too, and then I'm going to jump off of that into how we're all basically going off of China's plan as it relates to lockdowns and all this other stuff. Check the story out, Reuters. Austrian lockdown for the unvaccinated is days away, says the chancellor. Austria is going to place millions of people who are not vaccinated against COVID on lockdown. They said 65% of their population is fully vaccinated. You have to get an injection. Again, it does not matter if you've had it, if you contracted it and have natural immunity. That is irrelevant. They said many Austrians were skeptical about the vaccinations, and they said that under the incremental plan, that they said that they're going to induce lockdown for unvaccinated people. They said that the vaccination rate was shamefully low for COVID specifically. And they said that they want to avoid imposing extra restrictions on those who are fully vaccinated. So how is that going to work out there, champs? How is that going to work? They said that they will not allow people to leave their homes unless they're going to work or shopping for essentials. So they have declared a nationwide lockdown for unvaccinated people. No idea how they're going to enforce any of this. Their Chancellor Alexander Schallenberg said that it is unavoidable. That's how he described it. And he said that the unvaccinated face an uncomfortable winter and Christmas. He says, I don't see why 2/3 should lose their freedom because 1/3 is dithering. Wow. I'm just, wow. And they said that Upper Austria, the country's 3rd largest state, will begin their lockdown for the unvaccinated this coming Monday. Again, they've learned not a damn thing. Hey, maybe they'll have camps for people again. That is absolute tyranny. Only for the unvaccinated. This is about control. It's not about health because the vaccine does not prevent transmission, according to CDC Director Rochelle Walensky. Not at all. Look, I have to tell you, this is like some Stasi stuff going on. And this is what I go back to this thread because I'm reading this book from Michael Spenger. I've ordered it. I've finished a couple of different books on China already, but one is Snake Oil: How Xi Jinping Shut Down the World. Very interesting. Now, remember how China reacted. And he actually questions in his book, he really questions a lot of this stuff as it relates to the lockdown and how the policies were developed, right? And how Xi Jinping was really helping to develop this policy, the lockdown policy, the social distancing policy, etc. And they were saying that anybody, and it gets into, he calls it unrestricted warfare, where when people who logged onto social media, he writes, They were greeted with a barrage of videos alleged to depict scenes of a novel virus plaguing the residents of Wuhan. This is from Michael Singer. These sensations captured Wuhan residents in various pantomimes of pandemic horror, terrifying millions of viewers around the world. Some showed victims foaming at the mouth and collapsing in the streets. Others featured officials in hazmat suits. He writes, for the naturally skeptical, the videos tended to look hysterical and fake. In one, a team of police with the word SWAT on their uniforms in English caught a man with a butterfly net for not removing his mask. And they said that, he writes that official Chinese accounts widely shared an image of a hospital wing supposedly constructed in one day, but which actually showed an apartment that was 600 miles away. And he writes that in one of the biggest viral sensations, videos show Chinese people spontaneously kneeling over and dying from the virus in scenes likened to Zombieland and The Walking Dead. In one notorious clip, a spontaneously dying man throws his arms out to catch himself. Many dismissed the videos, but at the time these videos appeared, he writes, no one outside China knew whether or not COVID really did cause sudden death. And for those who didn't buy it outright, there was always that voice in their mind, what if, embedded into the unconscious mind, and that was the most powerful effect of all. He says another viral sensation claimed to show dead COVID victims lining the streets, waiting to be picked up like trash. One user tweeted about the video, Wuhan, China, dead bodies waiting for pickup, coronavirus, no ordinary virus, it's an intentionally released bioweapon. Some of the most influential footage showed authorities welding residents in their homes, Singer writes, both for their own good and even more for the good of the world. And it showed gets into all of these videos and pictures that were allowed to be shared, interestingly enough, considering how hardcore China keeps everybody locked down. They said that Michael Singer, who has a book on this, writes, the Wuhan fear videos were the first of several perfectly timed events that would provide the rationale for a fearful public to trade away their rights and livelihoods for lockdowns and restrictions. They crafted a powerful narrative and pre-programmed countless minds. And while the Wuhan videos consumed social media, most mainstream viewers had their first encounter with COVID fear propaganda through a story picked up by global media outlets. Now, you all remember, by the way, and I talked about this story. Now, Michael Singer says that Li Wenliang, he was one of the 8 whistleblowers, and I always wondered why the Global Business Times in China, which is it's a CCP-run media outlet, would allow to tweet this out, right? Singer says that the Li Wenliang story was propaganda. He says Li supposedly noticed an unusual incidence of pneumonia, warned his friends, and that the hospital staff were being quarantined, caused panic and anger. He was admonished by local authorities, and he said his story does not withstand scrutiny. It remains a mystery why 27 patients experiencing pneumonia in a city of 19 million might be notable. But he says on December 31st, 2019, the Wuhan municipal government was not so intent on covering up those cases that it made an alarmist public announcement about them on its site. Singer writes that the next day, 2 days before Li's supposed admonishment, People's Daily, China's largest communist-run newspaper, picked up the story and reported it in an alarmist fashion. And the first time that the world ever heard the name Li Wenliang was on January 27th, a month after he allegedly sent his viral messages, when an expose of him was published in one of CCP's most venerated propaganda outlets, Beijing Youth Daily. They said that searching for Wenliang's famous messages, blowing the whistle, turned up nothing, but coincidentally, Beijing Youth Daily first told of Li's purported existence. I mean, this is something else. The New York Times reported on Li Wenliang. We all remember the story. So Singer says that if the Times had done, he writes, if the Times had done cursory fact-checking, they would have realized that Li, and he's the eye doctor that was reportedly blowing the whistle about coronavirus, says that his warnings were invented just days prior by Chinese state media. And they said that rubber stamping propaganda from a totalitarian dictatorship would seem to be a serious violation of New York Times guidelines. So they had at least one bureau chief, Walter Duranty, who spent years watching Stalin's atrocities. So the lockdowns, which sprang into human consciousness, that was Xi Jinping. They were propagated, Singer writes, into global policy with a total absence of precedent, analysis, or logic. A cursory examination of the measures reveals nothing even remotely saying that they were taken by the Spanish flu. Remember everyone saying that, this is the response to the Spanish flu. That was never done during Spanish flu. Lockdowns are historically unprecedented. in human history. The end. Singer writes that they're not even mentioned in recent guidance offered by U.S. CDC. In the words of federal Judge William Stickman, quote, "It appears as though the imposition of lockdowns in Wuhan and other areas of China started a domino effect, where one country and state after another imposed draconian and hitherto untried measures on their citizenry." Stickman had good intuition, noted Singer. And he was, and talked about D.A. Henderson, the doctor credited with eradicating smallpox. They were blasting quarantine and lockdowns for anything like that. Now, here's the other thing. Singer adds, and just so you know, he is an attorney and an author. He says, no Western scientist publicly supported lockdowns until Xi Jinping personally authorized the unprecedented lockdown of Wuhan and other cities beginning January 23rd. And so, it all began when the lockdown of Wuhan started. WHO's rep in China noted that they were trying to contain 11 million people. This is unprecedented. There were all kinds of human rights observers who were concerned. Then you had Tedros, director of WHO, said he was personally impressed and encouraged by Xi Jinping's detailed knowledge of the outbreak, and he set a new standard for the response. So Tedros, notes Singer, was praising human rights abuses with nothing to show for them. And Bruce Aylward, who's with the World Health Organization, WHO, said, quote, "What China has demonstrated is you have to do this. If you do it, you can save lives and prevent thousands of cases for what is a difficult disease." And Aylward at WHO told everyone to copy China's response to COVID-19. It's a direct quote. And, by the way, Aylward also was one of the WHO officials who publicly refused to acknowledge Taiwan's existence. We played that audio of him refusing to do that, remember? In the very beginning of this. The WHO did not talk with other countries, consider their economics, demographics, or even number of cases. They just said you had to do this. So, Xi Jinping brought lockdown into human history. And Singer says it never would have entered into the collective imagination. And anytime anyone endorsed a lockdown, they were endorsing a Xi Jinping policy. There's a lot more on this, including just how far the tentacles of Xi Jinping's communism has gone. It is very Sun Tzu, and you're able to subjugate entire nations of people without firing a single shot. This is the new warfare. We have more to come that you do not want to miss.
A Dana show.
2 years ago, right, when all this, Black Lives Matter happened, Nike was one of the first company out there was standing with Black Lives Matter. Nike in America, Nike stands with Stop Asian Hate. Nike stands with LGBTQ community. Nike stands with Latino community. But when it comes to China, Nike remains silent because China is the big boss for Nike.
DanaLash.com. Make sure you go sign up for the newsletter, Substack, Word, Chapter, and Verse. Because I have a piece out about the Rittenhouse thing. And I'm going to have a piece coming out about the situation with China. And you just heard some of that audio. Where are they not? That's in that Cantor. China's the big boss for Nike. What do they not run, I think, is the better question here. What do they not run? So, a couple of things, because I want to get to, we've got a whole bunch of other stuff to get to, but I'm going to include this thread that I'm reading from Michael Singer, because I think that this is incredibly, it goes on and on and on. Singer gets into how how far the tentacles from the CCP go, and it gets into colleges and how everything was set up to really force subjugation through this type of this manner. There's just so much. In fact, there was a study that looked at and compared the accuracy of various institutions' models predicting coronavirus mortality. So the Imperial College, you know how everybody was talking about Imperial College? And, you heard Cantor there saying that, China's the boss for Nike. They run everything. And it's not just that. It's even now, why everything is so political as it relates to discussing anything with the coronavirus? Because of Xi Jinping. So, how many times have you heard of the Imperial College in context with coronavirus stuff in the past 2 years? A lot. In fact, that's like the only reason that some people are even aware of some of the things that they research and all of that they've done. So when Xi Jinping visited the UK, this was in 2015, as the General Secretary of the CCP, it lasted 4 days and he only visited one place. Only one. And that place that he visited was Imperial College, London. Now, why did he visit Imperial College London? Because they were announcing a new UK-China education and research collaboration. Nanotechnology, bioengineering, public health. And they said that the Imperial College, this is going to be China's best academic partner in the West. He had all of these pictures taken with him. And Singer notes that in February of 2020, the Imperial College proved just how they were China's best academic partner in the West. So Neil Ferguson ran a model predicting more than 500,000 in the UK, 2.2 million in the US might die of COVID. Everybody remembers that. We've talked about it. And Neil Ferguson recalled how China inspires him. He says, according to the Times, he said, it's a communist one-party state. We couldn't get away with it in Europe, and then Italy did it, and we realized we could. If China had not done it, the year would be very different. He was inspired by Communist Party of China. Now, the study that looked at the accuracy of various institutions' models predicting mortality, the Imperial College models had like super far higher rates of error than every other model. And there started to be a lot of criticism of Imperial College's modeling from a lot of people now that you see on cable news that talk about coronavirus and others. We've had some like Phil Kerpen, who's been on the show, has talked about how it's a little odd how their fatalities were always super higher and the error rate was super higher than everybody else's. They had these people that had no relevant credentials or interest in epidemiology working on this stuff. I mean, there's a paper trail, there's receipts. And Singer gets into it, I'm just going to wrap this up, but he gets into it in his book. And there was a piece on Medium called The Hammer and Dance, and it was the strategy of the hammer, the lockdowns, followed by the dance, the track and trace. Now, after they published Hammer and Dance, they had a German government, they had the panic paper that was distributed to members of their parliament and some media, and that played a huge role in Germany's lockdown. And the guy who authored it had no background in epidemiology or public health, but he taught in China, and he called Hong Kong parasitic. And he thought that the CCP was an exemplary form of government and that they handled the governance of Tibet beautifully. Direct quote. So none of these guys that were involved with the panic paper had no health or epidemiology background. They all were CCP stooges, and they taught in Beijing or Shanghai. So basically, and this gets in even to social media. Do you know how all the bots that are out there? Singer noted all the bots to spread coronavirus propaganda in Italy. They had hashtags that said "Go China, Go Italy" and "Grazie China," which was "Thank you China," and they said that thousands of clandestine social media posts flagged a state sponsor. They all use the same terms. They even had. So China uses this basically AI. They use algorithms and AI. They create fake accounts, and they had a fake doctor account that got verified on Twitter. I mean, it is insane. There was a coordinated, massive online push for using social media platforms that are banned in China. And interestingly, the governors that did not implement lockdown were badgered to bits online by these bots. Thousands of them. In fact, Singer notes that Brian Kemp was the first governor to end his state's lockdown. His Twitter feed was stormed in conspicuous language that attacked his anti-lockdown stance. And that's when China's state media began describing herd immunity as a strategy that violated human rights. So, in Sweden, their leaders, they did not want lockdowns. They were a huge target of CCP's lockdown propaganda campaign. And they were trying to establish scientific foundations for continuing lockdowns, like that it was underpinning lockdown was asymptomatic spread, Singer writes, sole basis for restricting health people. It was a novel feature of the COVID based on studies from China. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff. So essentially, everything that we're doing right now with regards to coronavirus was established and implemented by the Communist Party of China led by Xi Jinping. Everywhere. It is unbelievable. And it doesn't just deal with health. They have their tentacles absolutely everywhere. You had lockdown propaganda. Guess where the idea that it was selfish to want to be able to go and earn a living came from? China. All the receipts, screenshots, everything. CCP, Communist Party of China, Singer writes, was embedded at virtually every stage of its lockdown fraud by global media apparatus that aligned perfectly with the CCP's goals. They all adopted China's narrative in unison. China controlled all of this. They controlled all of it. I mean, there is the political censorship from social media platforms. Wired. Here's a headline from Wired, how China crushed coronavirus. I know, Nature. What China's coronavirus response can teach the world. New York Times. U.S. says virus can't be controlled. China says it's wrong. Wow. I mean, Reuters, Associated Press, everyone. Now here's the conclusion. The Soviet Union had tried to beat the West. Xi Jinping simply bought it. Singer writes.
So we really couldn't find a way to edit that for time, so you just needed to listen to the full kind of outline of where she's going with the book. And I just like how she just was going to read some and do a little preview and give us a context in the book, and it's definitely something that we're going to, I'm going to want for my shelf. But the point is that the ties that link this global prerogative and agenda together, working through the World Health Organization, which is just an organ of the United Nations, and as far as the globalist agenda, and you can see that despite whatever people in the UK may or may not be informed of, being subjects of the crown there and just going about their lives, the inner city of London and the Imperial College had a lot to do with what was going to take place, and initially, ultimately, Italy was going to follow suit with the lockdowns. And you can see that the entire thing was an amazing orchestration, because Washington, D.C. and the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, and the CDC. I mean, I really, all this information, we never even needed to know all this. I mean, and now we have to learn all this. But they were going to outsource the creation of this pathogen through Anthony Fauci and through Peter Daszak, and the whole thing was an orchestration of the secret cabal that operates throughout. People want to laugh and they want to make jokes when we discuss how the resurgence of the Illuminati, this global Illuminati, is working throughout all the different governments and councils and within the different courts of the crown in the UK, and within you can see that at the highest levels they're all tied together by their tails. Ultimately, and you can see that their agenda, and really it's a move towards de facto control. So by the time all the things become clear and all the information, and all the secrets are kind of known, it'll be too late, because you'll look outside and you realize that the entire control of the governing apparatus of your county and your city and your state and where you live in your country is being manipulated, and the strings are being pulled by people who are getting paid huge sums of money, or who are really just provocateurs acting on behalf of their masters, or they're really just fanatical sycophants of the propaganda, and they're just willing to go along with anything in order to further the ideology of their deeply held belief system, whether it be in environmental issues, or people are going to deify something within themselves and in their mind, and people are now deifying Gaia or the Earth as some kind of living spirit that they should worship and try to protect. And so, and of course, good stewardship is fundamental, and you can see that within the agricultural practices in America as far as environmentalism. The biggest and most effective environmentalists on the face of the earth are farmers, who are perfectly working with the environment in order to feed millions of people and also keep the environment and the conditions of the environment in pristine condition. Of course, these idiots in Washington, D.C., who get all their food package wrapped in styrofoam and cellophane are being fed by the farmers, the kulaks, if you will. And of course, they're going to target them first and try to control and manipulate them first, because they're going to have the most conservative values, being the most agrarian and natural and holistic actual species of political partisan that there is. So ultimately the most valuable asset we have in the world are our farmers, and you can see now they're being polarized and targeted, and their prices are being manipulated, and it's kind of a Stalinistic move towards all the people out in the countryside, the massive majority, the true Bolsheviks. That's what the word Bolshevik means, is majority. So when you think you're in the majority, then I guess you get to rule over everyone else. But of course, republicanism is going to protect the minority. So we're not just interested in having the majority only, but of course you can see that having all the red counties in America and having all the numbers is of little use when there's a technocracy who can just go into the computers and click the votes over and just subjectively manipulate elections. And I think that's really what the people in the world are reacting to in the fall of democracy into the hands of technocratic computer elites like Bill Gates, who are just obviously fixated like psychopaths on vaccines and how to continue to vaccinate everyone with DLT in Africa every year, even though the rest of the West will not use those kind of vaccines at all because they're dangerous. But let's continue on here. We have to continue on more. This is a labor, and this is a work, and this is a study. So if you don't have the time for this and you're listening, 15-minute video clips, you just need to go on about your business and follow a different program. But here we're dead serious. We're literally going to try to bring about as much information, clear, definitive, and effectively the most crucial information available to you. We're leaving aside all the other beliefs and notes and propaganda billets and the different things that we just don't need to pay attention to, including Tony Fauci himself. When everyone wants to just go get a Tony Fauci sign in your yard, these people are out of their minds. And the city of Washington, D.C. is a sick it's a province, it's a district of the future Columbiana, the universal plantation that they wish to descend us all into. And the main sinking sound that you can hear coming out of Washington, D.C. Is regarding, despite the hilarity and the enormous the irony of Joe Biden himself finally having gotten what he always wanted, to be the big boy in the big chair. And of course, he's just a cowardly and mute and senile sock puppet for Obama and Bill Gates and the team over the invisible committee over there who's ready to run us all into the ground. Of course, they only have a few more short years to live. We only get to be 90 or maybe 100, and then we die. So in the psychopathology of their terror and fear of death and their godlessness, they're going to try to do this kind of Hitlerian, Nazi, global Auschwitz, global death camps for all kind of move to save the environment or for whatever it is. It's really just anti-natalism. This is anti-humanism. This is really just the philosophy of misanthropy. And you can see that when you're dealing with people who are so nihilistic, they hate the human species itself, that their movements and their machinations and their plans can probably, their agenda could probably seem illogical, or it could be or irrational to people who love life, to human beings who love to carry on having children and love their existence and don't hate human existence. So you can see that on some level there's a level, these are haters, these are globalist haters, and they hate seeing that all the little people are breathing air and creating hydrogen, carbon dioxide, and just basically breathing the same air. And so now they want to regulate hydrogen dioxide. So basically at this point you can see that they're not really willing to share the environment and existence itself with the lesser people, which they figure now that they've achieved a technotronic and industrial supremacy with their chips factories, with computers making computers, and robots creating robots. So they don't need a massive global workforce anymore, and so they can just simply pull the plug. I think that's what you're hearing now, and there are different ideological reasons why, and you can embrace them or you can resist them, but ultimately we're coming to the crossroads, and I think we're looking at global death camps. So with that, we have just a couple more short articles to offer, and we'll try to wrap up this episode. It's gone a little bit long, which I appreciate because I guess I have a little more energy for this one. I mean, not all of our subject matter is equal. I want to bring to you what truth is suppressed, and of course I cannot tell you what the truth is for you or your conscience and what you will believe in. I just only can show you those things that are hard to find and difficult to understand, complex, sophisticated matters that are not discussed in this current culture of self-censorship and hysterical terror. I think people are just they're seeing that all the signals are crossed and that there's something wrong in the world when you listen to the different media outlets trying to convince you of contrary things. They're trying to send you here and send you there. They're trying to send you all these different directions against your will. They're trying to they've kind of plugged into your deep psychology, and they can seem to get your heart rate going, whether you really want to, engage that way or not. And so we have to recognize that it's our responsibility to be informed and to get the right information and not take in programming that sets us to self-destruct and causes us to be amped up and polarized. I mean, whether it's on the right or the left, whatever happens, we shouldn't be being antagonized and incensed and outraged into psychopathological behavior against our world and our. I guess that's what happens ultimately when they're sending out all these intense negative vibes. And all these different political partisanship is going to be, the rancor is becoming so toxic that people are reacting, and it's damaging, people's psychological state. So I think it's important for you to recognize that you need to make sure that the people who are speaking to you and forming you within, forming you inside your collective and intellectual state, are people that are trustworthy and who are not using the psychological weapons against you. And there's no reason in the world for you to collectively believe the presentation of these tyrannists who are going to, who are just mouthpieces for a larger global organization, whether it be through the World Trade Organization or whether it's the World Health Organization. These are the institutions and the shield wall behind which these globalists hide in order to try to make themselves and their authority seem more legitimate and actually guided by some kind of semblance of logic, or it's really just the scramble, the mad rush towards the authoritarianism and the fascistic move toward. They see the gates are open wide, and they've now moved quickly in their organization behind the scenes to clamor for the ability to control the rest of us. And of course they've forgotten to actually have some kind of legitimacy, and they have now exposed themselves to the world. So I think that this is how things get really dangerous and real messy really fast, because now they have a contingent of the world population that are informed and are not going to go along with it, and they can either just fail in their effort for world domination here, or they can just try to silence the masses and to cruelly extinguish lives. I mean, I think we have absolutely no reason to believe that these people are not as dead serious with their move towards global depopulation. And these are efforts that are going to limit the ability for people to take up too much oxygen in the environment. And so with that, we really need to take another look here at a fascinating discussion that Tucker Carlson had with Robert Kennedy Jr. And, Robert Kennedy Jr. has a little bit of a voice impediment, so you have to pay attention so you can hear what he is saying, because he's making a great effort to speak and discuss his great knowledge with, into the, with the interview here. And he has a lot to put forward and reveal. And as a legendary Democrat, we have to recognize politically in America that these fascists, these neo-Bolsheviks that have run up to take control of our institutions and our means of production and the means of law enforcement, and just take control of the entire governing apparatus in America, are not political. They're operating probably on the right and the left both, to orchestrate their efforts. And you can see that, you can see China taking full advantage of that. On some level, they're going to pay off Mitch McConnell and Nancy Pelosi both. So you can see as Americans, we're in terrible straits. We're in a dangerous situation. So I want to introduce, it's mostly going to be, Robert Kennedy Jr. talking, and Tucker Carlson has very few questions during the thing. So, but let's listen to it, and I'll add the link in the show notes, just like all the rest of this. And I expect that you'll take the time to go back and take a look at what's the issue and what we're dealing with here. And it's incumbent upon you to be able to decipher and to discern the underlying thesis here, which is that these are Malthusians. These people hate human beings. They have yachts, they have 14 homes, they jet set around the world in several planes and helicopters, but they hate looking at the little people in the huts and the hovels, just, the millions and millions of wretched poor out there. These are Malthusian haters, and that is the only way for you to understand the different steps in their plan here. And really, the orchestration of the Vatican behind it all, it's very simple. These people are distilled 14th century, Latin-speaking people who follow the code of canon law. So if you want to understand the code of canon law, you have to understand that everyone is either coming in every Sunday, taking communion, has received all the sacraments, and is a good Catholic, or they're a heretic. And heretics are outside God's grace, and they should be cast into hell, and they should be burned at the stake. All you have to do is read Thomas Aquinas and read some of the supposedly moral theologians who describe how it's no sin to kill or steal or murder a heretic, because they mean nothing to God. And it's the same thing with many Islamist extremists. They view the infidel or the Jew the same way that the Vatican does. So this whole idea of context in a global setting, for them to just put to sleep the remaining unviable, useless ears, they're just taking up space with these different vaccines, with all this different activity and globalism. It shouldn't surprise us. We shouldn't be shocked to our core because we've been fed a banana at lunch every day at our public school, and we've been pampered, pets of the Western bourgeoisie, in as much as that we can't look at how the sausage is made. We can only just unwrap our patties and eat them, from the store, and we can't understand how the chain of supply of livestock works, and how you get your food and your meat be processed, and just you become so weakened that now you're fully a coward in the ravages and in the agenda here that we're facing from these international medical tyranny elites. And that's what we're dealing with. And because they have doctors, suits on, and they have PhDs and they went to Georgetown University. You can't imagine that they would participate in such a heinous and atrocious abomination. But if you look at historically, that's exactly what's been going on. And it's exactly the Mengelas of the world, like this Fauciism that is going to direct us. And of course, we was such an enormous, huge scale when the German state was taken over by provocateurs and with an international agenda, who really just served the interests of the Vatican by liquidating all the Jews out of Germany. People just couldn't believe that such a thing could happen. Well, we're facing the same kind of insurmountable obstacle now, and we really need to go in and take a look here with Robert Kennedy Jr., and we'll take a listen to the seriousness of the situation.
But one of the key suspects has to be vaccines, because the vaccine schedule, we went from having 3 vaccines that I took when I was a kid, when I was fully compliant, to the 72 doses of 16 vaccines that our kids now are mandated to take if they want to stay in the school. And that really began in 1986 when they passed the Vaccine Act and gave complete shield from liability to all vaccine companies, so that if you're a vaccine company and you injured somebody, no matter how grievous the injury, no matter how reckless your conduct, no matter how negligent you were, no matter how toxic the ingredient, nobody can sue you. So there's no depositions, there's no discovery, there's no class actions, and there's no incentive for you to make that product safe.
May I ask, is there any other manufacturer, distributor, is there any other product that has that kind of liability protection?
There is liability protection. There's a cap with nuclear power plants. And that's called the Price-Anderson Act. At Congress, the insurance company wouldn't insure them, which was the problem with the Jap vaccines. It wasn't a bunch of hippies who looked at the vaccines and said they're dangerous. It was the insurance companies who said, you are too dangerous for us to insure. And Pfizer, what happened is, Pfizer, which was then called Wyeth, had a product in the early 80s when they started ramping up vaccines, and it was a diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis vaccine, a DTP vaccine. They knew that there was an injury rate because people started reporting injuries, but CDC was telling the world it was 1 in a million serious injuries. Their internal documents show that they believed it was 1 in 15,000 who got permanent brain injury or death. But then they NIH and Wyeth and UCLA funded a study at UCLA where they really did a controlled study, and they immediately found it was 1 in every 300 kids. The result of that, Wyeth at that time was saying, we are paying $20 in downstream liability for every dollar we're making a profit. They went to the Reagan administration and to the Democrats in Congress. This was, everybody was at fault here, and they said, if you don't give us blanket freedom from liability, we are going to stop making vaccines, and you will be out of a vaccine supply. So Congress passed and Reagan signed. Everybody was reluctant to do it. But Reagan actually said to the companies, why don't you just make the vaccine safe? And good question. And Wyeth said, because vaccines are unavoidably unsafe. And that phrase, unavoidably unsafe, is in the preamble to the Vaccine Act. And it is also part of the Supreme Court case in Berkowitz that essentially codified, that gave legal sanction, Brucewitz, that gave legal sanction to the freedom from liability. So once that happened, it was a gold rush because the vaccine companies said, holy cow, now we've got a product that is free from the biggest cause for every other every medicine kills somebody. There's vulnerable subgroups. So, and it is, for most medicines, it's their biggest cost. paying those liabilities. So now the company said, holy cow, now we're completely free from that cost. They also, vaccines is the only company, the only product that never has to be safety tested. And the reason for that, it's an artifact of the CDC's legacy as the Public Health Service, which was a quasi-military agency. That's why people at the CDC have military ranks like Surgeon General and they wear uniforms. And because it always had, the health agencies are very closely aligned with the military. And the vaccine program was conceived as a national security defense against biological attacks on our country. So they wanted to make sure that if the Russians attacked us with anthrax or some other biological agent, we could quickly formulate a vaccine, distribute it to 200 million American civilians with no regulatory impediments. And so they said, if we call this a medicine, we're going to have to test it like you test medicines, which is usually a 5-year placebo-controlled randomized double-blind study. And you do it for 5 years because many medicine injuries have long incubation periods or long diagnostic horizons. So you need that long period of time to really make a cost-benefit analysis over the long term of you saving lives. They said, we can't afford to do that, so their solution was, we won't call it a medicine, we'll call it a biologic, and we'll exempt biologics from safety testing. Now, none of the 72 vaccines that is currently mandated for our children has ever been safety tested against a placebo in preclinical trials. I made that statement for many years, and Tony Fauci said that I was wrong. I met with Tony Fauci in 2016 and Francis Collins with somebody from the Trump White House present. And I was with Del Bigtree and Aaron Siri and Lynn Redwood, who's a nurse practitioner. And I reiterated that statement to them. There's never been a single preclinical trial of randomized controlled placebo testing for any of the 72 vaccines. They said in front of the White House Observer, you're wrong. And I said to them, and show me one. I knew they didn't exist unless they had them locked in a safe, because I'd asked for them on Freedom of Information requests and they hadn't been able to produce them. Oh, they just said, we're wrong, we'll get them to you. And they never did. It's the last I heard from them. So we sued them. Del and Aaron and me for ICANN. We sued them, and after a year in 2017, after a year of litigation, HHS came back and said, you're right, we've never done it. So nobody knows the risk profile for any of those vaccines. So nobody can tell you with a scientific certainty whether any of those products are causing more deaths and injuries than they're averting. People say I'm anti-vaccine. I'm not. I'm pro-science and pro-safety testing. If there's a vaccine that is shown to work in a preclinical or in a randomized placebo-controlled trial, I 100% would support it. And by work, I mean that after 5 years, the vaccinated cohort is healthier than the unvaccinated cohort. That's really what we need to know.
So let me ask you a question. Can I ask you a question? You are effectively defending science, the scientific method, the free inquiry that's the basis of science. I couldn't agree with you more. At the beginning of this whole thing, I asked the obvious question with the VAERS numbers. Like, what? Every medicine kills somebody. That is demonstrably true. Advil kills people. So, like, what's the harm, demonstrated harm of this vaccine? Nobody wants to ask that question. Nobody wants to hear it posed. People become hysterical on both sides if you ask that question. You've been borne the brunt of that hysteria for years. What is that? What's the psychology that leads people to say, I don't want to know about the downside?
Well, let me talk, because you mentioned the VAERS number. The VAERS is a vaccine adverse event reporting system.
Yes.
What the HHS rationale is that, yes, we didn't do adequate safety trials. They're abbreviated, and they're abbreviated. They're too short to actually do safety trials. But if there are, and they were stratified and there weren't certain age groups. You don't know what the risk factor is, really know what the risk factor is for older people. It turns out if you're over 70, your risk from COVID are 1,000 times greater than if you're under 70. So, and that's really important when you craft public health policy, have that kind of information, right? Because your strategy for children should be completely different than your strategy from adults. They didn't have that kind of stratification in that study where you could look at each of those cohorts and make those kind of, calculations. What the HHS and the public health agency said is, we will figure that out post-licensing if we will start giving these vaccines to millions of people, and we will then see if people are harmed. The problem is the system, the surveillance system that they have, which is the only one that, that they've had for years, the vaccine adverse event reporting system. Now, the vaccine adverse event reporting system, which we'll call VAERS, has collected a humongous number of injuries. It's a voluntary system, so the doctor or somebody injured has to call in, and it takes about 30 minutes to make up the, to go through the process, and there's no real penalty if you skip it. So a lot of doctors don't recognize vaccine injury. They have an incentive not to report it because they just gave your kid the shot and they said it's going to save his life, and if instead he's in a wheelchair or crippled, they don't really want to acknowledge it was the vaccine. They just say that happened. So that kind of non-reporting is epidemic. So but nevertheless, there have been 17,000 deaths reported to VAERS from the COVID vaccines, and that's more deaths in the last 8 months than all of the deaths from all vaccines, the billions and billions of vaccines combined over the past 30 years. So this vaccine it appears to be killing more people than all vaccines combined. There's more reports of deaths following vaccination. Here's the problem, is that the VAERS system doesn't work. It is designed, in fact, to fail. It's designed to undercount injuries by as much as 99%. Why do I say that? Because HHS did a study on the system in 2010. People can look it up. It's called Lazarus et al. And they published it. And they spent millions of dollars on this study, and they looked at one HMO. And what they did is they designed a machine counting system. How does a machine counting system work? Well, you take the HMO, has all the deaths, has all the records of all the medical claims of all their patients, and they have the vaccine records down to batch number. So every vaccine that patient took, they know. So it's quite easy to use AI to do a cluster analysis and compare whether people who got this batch of this vaccine are getting more diabetes or autism or ADD or rheumatoid arthritis or autoimmune disease or whatever. You can do it in an instant. So they designed a system like that, and they used it on the Harvard Pilgrim HMO in Boston, and then they compared it to what VAERS was getting, and what they found was that the vaccine injuries were actually very, very common. They were happening in about 1 out of every 40 people per vaccine, and that VAERS was missing more than 99%. So the conclusion of that study is fewer than 1% of vaccine injuries are reported. Now, the interesting thing is they have that machine counting system, and they were going to roll it out to all the other HMOs. But when CDC saw the results, the frightening, alarming results, they killed that study. And they refused to answer the phone calls of Lazarus and his team. And Lazarus and his team were, they were people from Harvard, and they were members of another health agency that is also within HHS. So CDC stopped talking to its fellow agency because it didn't like the news they were trying to give. It's called the Agency for Health Research Quality, the AHRQ. And how do I know this? Because if you look up the Lazarus study, the last lines in it say, CDC, when we showed them the results, they were very proud that they had done this. The CDC showed them, when they showed the results to CDC, they said the CDC officials in charge of this project refused to answer our phone calls afterwards. So they just shut them down because they saw something that they did not want the public to know about vaccine safety.
It's horrifying. So in the book, and even in the title of the book, you make the connection between Tony Fauci and Bill Gates. So for our viewers who are not familiar with that connection, can you give us a sense of what it is and why it matters?
In 2000, Tony Fauci flew out to Seattle, Washington, and he had this meeting, this very strange meeting in Bill Gates' $85 million mansion on the banks of Lake Washington. And Gates brought him into his library and he said, I want to propose a partnership with you. And the partnership was to try to vaccinate all of humanity. And they ended up calling that, in 2009, they rechristened the program the Decade of Vaccines. Gates went to the UN and gave this speech in which he promised to vaccinate essentially all of humanity with a multiple battery of vaccines by 2020. And he began using his philanthropy to create a series of other quasi-governmental agencies, CEPI, Gavi, and a number of others, and then to gain control of the WHO. And what he calls what he does philanthropic capitalism. It's not about philanthropy. It's about enriching the capitalists. What he does is he buys, and he does this in a number of areas I show in the book. He does it with food. He did it with the core curriculum. He buys large stakes in companies that could benefit from a change in governmental policies, a worldwide change in governmental policies. So he owns stakes, very, very large stakes, in almost all the big pharmaceutical companies. Then he gives essentially about $1 billion to WHO every year, but through Rotary International, through Gavi, through CEPI, and through the Gates Foundation. But they're sort of cumulatively even larger than the U.S., which is the second biggest. That gives him control over WHO's policy. So the analysis of WHO say there's nothing that goes through WHO that is not vetted first by the Gates Foundation. And WHO controls the HIV money, and it funds the health agencies at most African countries. So they're completely reliant on those annual checks from WHO. And what Gates and WHO do, or WHO at Gates' behest, because a lot of people in WHO do not want to do this, he's taken them away from their traditional occupations, which was economic development, hygiene, food supply, food production, and local democracy and local control. So WHO does very little of those things now, and they really focus, over 50% of their budget focuses on one of Gates' vaccine, one only, the polio vaccine, which is a flawed vaccine. The polio vaccine, according to WHO's own number, causes 70% of the polio on Earth every year. So it's not a successful vaccine, but what he does then is he through WHO will go in and say to the African country, if you want your annual check from us, here's what you've got to do. You have to show an 80% uptake of the DTP vaccine. The DTP vaccine we don't use in white countries. The United States, that's the vaccine that was killing one every 300 kids. We got rid of it. The Europeans got rid of it. But Gates gives 161 million African children that vaccine every year. And what he'll say is, the WHO will say to this country, you don't get your HIV money, you don't get your systems money to run your health agency unless you can show us that you've vaccinated 80% of your kids. And that's a hypothetical number, but it will be something like that with the DTP vaccine. Then they get so those countries then are forced to buy that vaccine, and that vaccine, they have to purchase it ultimately from one of the companies that Gates is heavily invested in. And Gates is so what he has a $33 billion corpus that he's put in the Gates Foundation, but it's still his money. He's still controlling it. And it's now tax deductible. It's shielded from taxes, and he is now deploying it to change government policies in a way that enriches companies that he's elsewhere invested in. And he does the same thing with food. He switched millions and millions of African from subsistence farming that they've been doing successfully for 10,000 generations to GMO crops, to heavily, lots of inputs, chemical agriculture, carbon-based fertilizers that all have to be imported by his companies. He has huge investments in Monsanto, in Cargill, and then in the processed food companies that are then buying those commodities cheap, like Coca-Cola, McDonald's, and Kraft cheese, those kind of things. So the more you look at it, though, the more corrupt it gets. But his deal with Tony Fauci, which I go into in detail, what the result, the outcome for that bargain on the lives and health of millions and millions of Africans and South Asians has been absolutely catastrophic.
Why do you, not to get to motive, this is an exhaustively reported book that I can't recommend strongly enough. But I have to ask, what do you think motivates, apart from the profit motive that you just explained? There does seem to be an ideological fervor behind these vaccination campaigns. Like, it seems there's a religious quality to it. Am I imagining that?
Religious quality to it, right? To the orthodoxy. What motivates it is pretty simple, which is power, which is motivated. Bad behavior and good behavior for, since human beings left Eden, right? In fact, that's why we got kicked out of Eden. Right? So that's, it's not a mystery that people want to accumulate power. Bill Gates is not interested in money in terms of currency. He's not sitting there, making big piles of bills. People accumulate money so that they can have power over their lives, over their environment, over their health, their food, but ultimately over other people. And some, if you're a sociopath, or even people who are very, very well motivated, want to have power because they believe that they have a unique opportunity or unique ability to improve people's lives. So whatever, and one thing I don't do, there's 2,200 footnotes in that book. Everything is cited and sourced. And what I do is I show conduct. I do not try to look into people's heads.
I noticed that. But
you were asking about the orthodoxy, and you and I actually talked about this at another time. That orthodoxy is why do people have this religious fervor when it comes to vaccine? Why can't I sit down with my friends, my liberal friends, and have a fact-based conversation? Why do I have to be silenced? Why do people consider me dangerous? So that you're taking a huge risk by putting me on this show. Why can't we do what you're supposed to do in a democracy, which is to have, ultimately to find common ground with people who disagree with you, to love your enemy, to have fact-based debates, and that are congenial and that are and that maybe can resolve and maybe not resolve issues. And instead, anybody who tries to talk about these things runs into something that looks like an old-style medieval religious orthodoxy, which is the repetition of these shibboleths: follow the science, protect granny, stop being selfish. And but a total total unwillingness to talk about facts, a total an imperviousness to factual argument, and not only that, but just a ferocious anger that you are dangerous because you have a different point of view than I do, and that kind of orthodoxy has occurred throughout time. We are kind of designed to embrace orthodoxy we're hardwired for orthodoxy from the 20,000 generations. Our race spent wandering the African savannah in tiny groups, following a powerful leader at war with all of our neighbors, and having to embrace as a unit cohesion through a uniform cosmology, and anybody on the out group was evil and dangerous, and anybody on the in group, no matter how badly behaved they were, they had to be defended. And it's tribalism writ large, and that's what we're looking at. We're looking at this polarization and tribalism, and I believe a lot of that is strategic. And what I try to do is completely divorce myself from the politics and talk to Republicans and Democrats, because I think what we're seeing now is this imposition of these controls that have benefited these elites. There's 500 new billionaires. Since the lockdown started, there's been a shift of $3.8 trillion in wealth from working people globally to this top rung of billionaires, most of them Silicon Valley people, or from this communications grid, who are, by the way, tied to the intelligence agencies through a variety of different entanglements. But it's Gates, it's Larry Ellison, it's Sergey Brin from Google, it's Mark Zuckerberg, it's Bloomberg, the mainstream, and social media. And the weird thing that people don't seem to see is that these people who are cashing in with hundreds of billions from the lockdowns are the same people who are censoring criticism of the lockdowns. And kind of a closed loop there, isn't it? It's a closed loop, and the better thing for them is if the Republicans and Democrats are fighting with each other, and blacks and whites are fighting, and the polarization and the anger and the bitterness at the ground level is occurring, and nobody is noticing that they are feeding on the corpses of our obliterated middle class and gorging themselves.
So if you're listening carefully and you're paying attention, each of the different speakers and authors and news people and all the different articles that we introduce on this podcast, the people are really saying the same thing over and over again in different ways. And so I think that the ties, he's a careful man, he's an intelligent man, the ties to the intelligence agencies are the most foreboding and the most difficult and most dangerous of all, with this new Stasi, this neo-Stasi coming out of Washington, D.C. And you can see that we are being targeted for persecution, elimination, just to make sure that your messages are shadow banned by Facebook, or at every level. Maybe that your bank will get enough complaints, or maybe they go to the same cocktail parties, and then maybe your bank will take your bank account, and maybe your different ways of doing business online will be deplatformed. And so it's really what one author, Conrad Black, said was the algorithm ghetto. And I think that's what we're dealing with. And we have no really recourse to deal with it, because the entire edifice of the banking apparatus, the industrial base of the society, the social media technocracy out of Silicon Valley, all these different aspects of your life and the way of relating publicly and doing business and living your life are controlled by an apparatus, a neo-Marxist apparatus that's only interested in taking absolute control over what you can know, what you can learn, what your kids are allowed to learn in school, what medicines you take, and they're, like we said, they're only interested in controlling and destroying anything that doesn't empower them. So, in order to really wrap up this episode, we've gone a lot in this. We have one more interesting little anecdote to add, and it's really the C-SPAN interview and the C-SPAN discussion panel with Peter Daszak, where he really explains exactly what what Tony Fauci sent him to China to accomplish, which is to create this super infectious pathogenic contagion virus, and that's exactly what they did. And in the C-SPAN special in 2017, he just publicly states it outright what he did. And so we have to recognize that it was the different news agencies like Revolver News and the National Pulse news agency that brought this information to light. Reporters like Natalie Winters. Otherwise, we would not even be discussing this today, and we wouldn't be informed as we are. So let's listen to Peter Daszak as he describes how he is going to be financed by Tony Fauci to betray the American people and to really do something quite illegal. And remember above all that Peter Daszak is a subject of the British Crown, and he's a member, another agent, like the Steele dossier, another apparatchik, another agent of the British intelligence agency, if you will, in order to further their agenda, a tie back to London. So here's Peter Daszak.
We found other coronaviruses in bats, a whole host of them. Some of them looked very similar to SARS. So we sequenced the spike protein, the protein that attaches to cells. Then I didn't do this work, but my colleagues in China did the work. You create pseudoparticles, you insert the spike proteins from those viruses, see if they bind to human cells. And each step of this, you move closer and closer to this virus could really become pathogenic in people.